All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Physics podcast. This is your host, Joseph Guzman. So, this is the fourth episode of the Beyond the Physics podcast, and to give you a glimpse behind the curtain, I have just uploaded the first episode of the podcast where I interviewed Terrence. And from that episode, I've received a lot of support from friends, family, and peers in the community. And so I just want to take a moment here to really thank you all for checking it out and supporting me in this endeavor. And of course, some of that support comes in the form of feedback and criticisms. And I just want to take a moment here to also say that I'm really going to take all those comments to heart. But here, I just want to be transparent about my thinking, because it's probably apparent now that I have quite the significant backlog of episodes. And so my reasoning is this. Since I'm in graduate school, my workload often becomes overwhelming. And so in this way, I don't have to be as concerned about maintaining a schedule and falling behind in terms of uploading. But the consequences of that plan, though, are apparent in that when I do receive feedback or criticisms from you, it can take some time before you see that implemented onto the show. So I'm just bringing this up now so that perhaps we can be all mindful of this moving forward. And I ask that you please be patient and continue commenting regardless, because I can guarantee you that I truly consider everything sent my way. Anyways, moving on to today's episode. So today, my co-host Irene, Roman, and I are joined by our friend Sahana. So Sahana is a physics graduate student with an emphasis in astronomy. So in that respect, her and I have a lot of shared common interests. And we start the conversation by probing what motivated Sahana to get into physics and astronomy. And then we move on to a dilemma in physics, which I will pitch to you now. So, physics in the United States is currently addressing a crisis in terms of the number of underrepresented minorities in the field. And to help illustrate this, I'm going to throw some numbers your way, which ought to help frame the context of what exactly we're dealing with. And these numbers come from the American Institute of Physics, AIP, who released a report in March 2018 to try to help quantify the number of underrepresented minorities in the field. So, for instance, the percentage of physics faculty members who were women in 2014 was 16%. That's a 1/6. Also, when considering the ethnic distribution of all physics bachelor students from 2014 to 2016, 74% of those students were white. And when considering the ethnic distribution of physics PhDs from the same time period, 46% of those were white. But when we consider only PhDs in the US, that number almost doubles to about 87% of those students were white. So when you compare these types of statistics to other fields, physics often seems to have the most homogeneous distribution, the least diverse, and is perhaps one of the worst offenders in terms of inclusiveness, irrespective of the reasoning as to why this is happening in the first place. And so maybe this seems a little surprising and can really put a frame on how unique me, Irene, Sahana, and all the previous podcasts guests are. We are really not the norm of the field. Anyway, so this is a problem that has been referred throughout some of these podcasts, but perhaps wasn't given its due diligence in terms of providing you the context of the severity of the issue. But the dilemma is this, that this issue is less pronounced in astronomy, at least specifically when comparing the number of women in astronomy. For instance, in 2017, the percent of women who got a PhD in astronomy was around 40%, which is a stark contrast from the 16% that we see in physics PhDs. So the question that we posed to Sahana and that I now pose to you is, why do you think such a closely related field to physics, such as astronomy, has more equal representation among the sexes? Anyway, so throughout the conversation, we try to paint a broader picture of what it feels like to be a woman in physics or in astronomy. And in general, for tonight's conversation, we do get a wide-angled view of some of the barriers in the field that spans many topics. And we also spend a reasonable amount of time talking about the prospect of aliens and how we can address the Fermi-Paradox, relating this to the Drake equation, what shapes life might look like, and so on. Anyways, I'm particularly proud of this episode of the podcast. It felt like we had a pretty good flow going, so I really hope you guys stick around for this one. And with that, I bring to you our conversation with our good friend, Sahana. This is Beyond the Physics. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Physics podcast. This is your host, Joseph Guzman, and today I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, Irene Roman.
Hey everyone, it's Irene.
And our very special guest today is our good friend, Sahana.
Hi.
Right, so Sahana is also a graduate physics student, and she's also an astrophysics nerd. Is that fair to call you?
I think so. I think that's accurate.
Right, so we have a common bond in that aspect, at least. But I guess I just wanted to start today's conversation with probably the most broad question that I could start with is, what is your perspective on what were the motivations that brought you to physics? How do you conceptualize how you got into physics?
I definitely got into physics through astronomy.
Okay.
Astronomy was always my big interest, and so it was just this level of curiosity that I've always had very deep down. And in trying to learn about how the universe works, sort of going through school and taking math and physics courses and then astronomy courses, astronomy is, there's the part where you look at the universe, but to explain how things actually work or to explain what you see, you need physics. So that's kind of how I got to physics, is how do we explain all this really cool stuff that we see out there. And I kind of liked the idea of, for me, especially in high school, learning about physics, it felt like math with a purpose or math with reasons behind it. And I like that idea of, you have these tools, you have these math tools, but you pick and choose which things you incorporate in your method, or you get to say, I'm going to cut out this entire part of an equation because it does not pertain to the reality I'm looking at. So I liked that idea of having reasons behind what you do and using those reasons to explain what you see.
Mm-hmm. So then at what point in your life did astronomy come into the forefront?
I think officially astronomy probably in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I did a summer program that was astronomy, and it was something I was always interested in as a kid, and memorized all the constellations. But really in high school is when I learned you can actually do this as a career. You can actually go to school for this. There's actually opportunities in this. Mm-hmm. And I was I had a great experience at this program, got to meet people who encouraged me and told me, here are ways to get through, here are programs you can do, and then just pursuing it through college, and now ending up here in grad school still doing astronomy many years later and hopefully for many years in the future.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so I mean, this is kind of like a tangent, but as far as I'm aware for the statistics, astronomy happens to be one of the better represented in terms of like women
Absolutely.
in like physics and stuff like that. And I was just curious as if you had any speculation or hypothesis as to like why you think that is. Like, why were you personally drawn to astronomy, and why do you think that applies like in general?
I think a lot of it has to do with the culture, like the academic culture of astronomy versus physics. Like when I was in college, astronomy and physics were two separate departments, and I had to take classes in both as an undergrad, and I genuinely did feel the difference in the social atmosphere between the two. And so one thing that I personally have noticed about astronomers is like the subject matter is so big and requires coordinating with people around the world that for the most part, you have to work with other people. It's impossible to do astronomy alone because we're just stuck on one part of the planet. You need people around the world to work on this kind of thing. And so this type of forced collaboration makes people nicer, but it also opens the door for people to collaborate with people who are different from them, people from different backgrounds, people who have different languages. And so in my experience, through collaboration, astronomers are much more open to talking and listening to people through research, and that kind of evolves into actually listening to them and getting to know them as people. And also a large part of it is like if you are getting into astronomy, most people get into astronomy at a like fairly young age, or they try to pursue it in college. So it's like at a time when you're hopefully more open to people or sort of forming your own thought processes and opinions of the world. And so if you go into this sort of welcoming environment, you're more likely to keep that culture going.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting observation, right? Like, because I guess it's probably true that in other fields or subtopics of physics, you could kind of have your own lone island of like your expertise, and you really don't need to rely on other people. I think probably a good case study is like the recent, announcement with the image of the black hole, right?
Absolutely.
That requires interferometry from, telescopes all across the world, right? So it is a very collaborative science, right? So I think that's an interesting point. I don't know. I mean, so Irene, what's your perspective on, I guess you are not in astronomy, right? You are in the much more pronounced minority of women in physics, specifically high energy physics. So what's your perspective on, do you perceive a difference between physics and astronomy, or?
Well, I don't have any experience in astronomy, so I really don't know what the culture there socially is like. But from what you describe, I guess that has not been my experience in physics at all. I think it's partly my own personality, but it's also, I feel like I haven't felt like a welcoming environment in the different types of research experiences that I've had. So I'm just now getting into a high energy particle physics group. And in this group, there's only one other woman, and then I would be the second. And to me, it feels like the environment is a little bit more isolated. So everyone's working on their own projects. And also, it seems like all of the research advisors are working on pretty distinct projects as well. So, and each has about 2 to 3 students. So they don't really have the need to collaborate as much as it seems like in astronomy you would have the need to collaborate, right? So, like you said, I don't see that because there's not so much of a need, that social welcoming environment isn't easily created. So there has to be a driving force that's pushing for that. And I think that a lot of people become complacent in the current environment because they're busy, they have a lot of work to do. And they don't notice that there is a need. I personally believe a need to create that kind of welcoming environment, but across physics. So, I mean, I'm sure that I don't even have that much experience in high energy yet, so I can't say for sure whether that environment is there or not, but it doesn't seem like it is the way that you're talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because I think if our hypothesis is true in terms of the goal of the podcast, right, is like the way I envision it is that if we were to create a more welcoming and supportive community in physics in general, we would see underrepresented minorities pop up like everywhere, and we would see that equal representation show up as it has in astronomy, right? So I think I noticed the same thing. I feel like astronomy and astrophysics in general, in my experience across the few research groups that I have been a part of, it does feel more welcoming. And so I think it could be an interesting point of like perhaps there could be some interesting statistics as to whether you look at, you know, the culture, if there's some way of quantifying the culture in astrophysics and astronomy versus the culture in physics, and see how that could correlate to, you know, underrepresented minorities in the field. But anyways, that's just my crazy notion at the moment.
Yeah. I think you brought up something interesting in that, like, these driving forces behind the culture. And, like, one thing that I have had conversations with other women in astro about is over the last, I'd say 50 years or so, there's been a lot of rewriting of history or bringing discoveries to light, where women did a bulk of the work, but their male counterparts or their male supervisors got all the credit for it. And so this sort of bringing those like injustices to the forefront in the last few decades or so has, I think, really impacted the culture in astronomy, because women have contributed so much to astronomy, especially in the last like 200 years or so. And so being in a field where you can say like, oh, if I make a discovery, I can actually get credit for it, is not something that underrepresented minorities can actually say in a lot of parts of physics.
Yeah.
But astronomy is definitely emerging as one of those fields where you can do so. And it's also gotten the attention of non-science people. And so because astronomy is known as a topic that people are generally fans of, even if they have no science background, it's a way to, you can still talk about the culture within astronomy without knowing anything about the subject itself.
Right.
Whereas in physics, I think it's a little bit different because you can't really, it's harder to convince people like, oh, here's why this subject is so like exciting, and here's why you should be concerned about these culture issues and why it's keeping out people from studying this subject. Like, I think there's a case we made of like, sometimes you have to convince people that representation is good, and it sucks that we have to do that.
Yeah.
But it can be, you know, I think it's easier in astronomy when you have things like astronauts and these really exciting big pictures, when really like theoretical physicists do some really, really cool stuff that have very deep implications. It can be hard to get public support the way that astronomy has had in the last few decades.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think that kind of ties into what Irene often talks about, is the importance of having role models, right? And I guess it's the case that, like, in my personal instances, the people that I look up to, my role models, often happen to be interested or are themselves astrophysicists, right? I think the public educators in terms of science and in physics in particular, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan, you know, they're very clear examples of people that I look up to and could kind of take after their example, right? Whereas in terms of general physics, that's much less common, right? Like having someone that you can clearly look up to and is trying to disseminate this very complicated body of work to the broader general public, right? And so I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sahana, how do you, what resources do you feel were like available to you growing up in terms of like pursuing your studies and things of the nature? I'm always curious to ask because, you know, my perspective is that when I was growing up, I kind of had to fend for myself, you know, most of the time, up to a certain point. Like, most of like middle and high school, and then most of college, undergrad. It was kind of just me fending for myself. I wonder, is that your experience? Do you feel like your parents had like a big influence, or maybe you had some mentors that were guiding you along the way, or something like that?
I think, yeah, that my family definitely had a big influence in the sense of education is really important. You need to pursue education and like don't take school for granted. And I grew up in like a university town in a very like competitive high school too, and so I was also in a culture of where people were very like focused on their grades and very just like, okay, like we all need to do really good. Like I remember it feels silly to think about now, but like in high school I took I think like 3 AP courses like the whole time, and like that was considered low for a lot of people in my high school. Like people would take a bunch of them and like would want to go into college with like a bunch of credits, and I definitely took like the lower end. And so I think it was also coming from that atmosphere, but I was also pretty like self-motivated once I found out that like astronomy is something you can do. I kind of felt like I have to try. There are always other career paths, and you can do general like science or engineering or something. There are also cultural pressures from that, but that's a whole other thing. But part of it for me was something I just really wanted to do, and I want to try it and see how far I can go with it. And if I don't make it all the way, I'll stop somewhere and I'll figure it out then. But for now, let me see how far I can go. And I think I'm still kind of in that mindset. Just going after a PhD, it definitely still does feel like, okay, can I go a little further? Can I keep going further? And like now that I've been in academia for a while and know what the career path is, I have a better idea of what I'd want to do in the future. But for a while, it was just like, let me see if I can do it. Oh, you can actually do it. Okay, just keep going. And I think once I made it to college and like officially declared my astrophysics major, that's when it kind of like set in stone and was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And I actually was a double major in like physics and astrophysics for a while, but the physics courses, there were some of them I honestly didn't care for, and just classes filled up. I got delayed getting into classes, and like I said, the culture between the physics department and the astro department was really different, and I decided kind of in my 3rd year that, I'm just going to drop the physics major, take the physics minor, and just go full astro. So I think that's when I really committed to it even more.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was also, I love telescopes. I've always wanted to work with telescopes. And so in theory, there are people who have to run the telescopes. So maybe I could be that person someday. So it's more of like having an end goal and then being like, all right, I'll figure it out in the meantime, but just keeping an eye on what the end goal is.
Right. So there's a lot of branching off points I kind of want to touch. So we'll see how much I could hit in the end. But I guess I would, if you're open to it, like get a deeper sense of like what those cultural pressures kind of were. Like what kind of expectations did your parents have? Was it kind of more stereotypical, like they want you to be a doctor, like a medical doctor or something, or
or engineer, doctor or engineer was part of it. I think actually for me, so I'd say like, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, I want to be an astronomer, I want to be an astronaut. It's like, oh, that's cute, like that's cool. People don't really take you seriously until you're like, maybe high school or so, and then they're like, okay, are you really going to do this? And I think in my case, like one sort of pivotal thing for like the cultural aspect of it is, let's see, when was this? 2003 was when the space shuttle, I believe it was Columbia, exploded upon re-entry. And Kalpana Chawla, who's the first Indian American astronaut, was on there, and she died. And I like have a very distinct memory of that because at that time, even though I was already being like, oh, like I want to do astronomy, Indians don't do astronomy. Indians don't really do that kind of thing. But after that happened, everyone knew her name. Everyone knew there was an Indian on the space shuttle. Like, an Indian made it to space. And it definitely turned into like, oh, like, why would you want to do that? Or, oh, are you going to tell horoscopes? To like, oh, like Kalpana Chawla. Like, everyone knew who she was. And so it was this interesting switch of where it was like, she did it. I could do it too. Or like, you know, she did it. It's established. You can do that here. And it was, I mean, it sucks that they died, but it was also a way that, like, I think it definitely opened up the eyes of the community here in America, in that there are other career options for your kids when you come here. And I mean, like, my parents did definitely also want me to, like, you know, maybe do a double major in CS so you get a job afterwards. And after I graduated, I had some time between grad school and undergrad, and I applied to jobs, and a lot of them were tech jobs. And it was like, okay, you know, maybe you can go work in Silicon Valley or something if astronomy doesn't work out. So I felt like there were always lots of doubts, but I think now I try to think of those doubts as them just trying to, like, look out for me and want me to have a secure future.
Right.
I mean, at the time, it felt like, you don't believe in my dream or my goals or everything I've accomplished so far. But I understand their hesitancy for wanting to pursue a career that doesn't have a set path, that we haven't seen other people successfully do.
Yeah.
But someone has to be the first, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have like a similar experience. Like, I don't know if my mom even remembers this, but like, when I first was an undergrad, and I think the first semester I took Calc 2 or something, and I was doing really shitty. And I called her, and I just wanted to tell her that I was basically upset, and that, like, you know, I'm doing really bad, you know, I'm worried about my prospects and stuff. And she immediately said, oh, well, maybe you should quit. Right? Maybe you should become a car mechanic or something. And I was like, where the hell did she get car mechanic? Like, yeah. It's like, seems almost racist, but and so, like, I know that's her just, you know, trying to look out for me, and wants, you know, doesn't want me to suffer, right, in terms of, like, struggling through these classes and, you know, feeling terrible about myself or whatever. But yeah, it totally felt like, you know, like, she was giving up a little too quickly, right? Like, I literally just started, and then, you know, rather I would have just, you know, her say something like, you know, oh, you know, that's okay, you should just keep going, whatever. Just rather just listen to me, you know, and stuff like that. But
yeah, and I had a few moments like that too, and I think part of that is also why I'm so, like, ingrained in astronomy now, is because you do have those moments when, like, the people who are most supportive of you don't support it. They don't feel like they're supporting it at the time, and so it makes you question, is this actually what I want to do? And in doing that questioning, like, for me, I was like, yeah, this is. And I think some of that struggle, or that, like, backlash, I don't really know what the right word is for it, but the sort of doubt, because it's not a common career path, kind of solidified it more for me. And that's something that I've heard other people on Astro have also experienced. And so it's this thing of where we're here because we want to be here. No one falls into astrophysics and just gets stuck there.
Right.
It's a subject that you have to, like, climb to and hold on to. And I think that's why a lot of astrophysicists are really passionate about what they're doing, and why people care about trying to make their work environment better, or trying to sort of address larger issues within the field, because, like I said, no one's there just as a day job.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd just like to take a pause here to see if, Irene, do you have a similar experience, or how supportive do you feel like your parents or the culture around you was towards your pursuit of physics?
I think that luckily my father was an electrical engineer. Now he's retired, but he was always very supportive in my interest in math and science, and so he never really had a specific path that he wanted to push me towards. He always just wanted me to go for what I wanted and what I was interested in. So thankfully, I never had that kind of pressure. I think for myself, have always doubted, though, whether I'll be good enough to pursue the interest that I have. And I guess it's kind of similar how you said you had this end goal of what you wanted to achieve, but you didn't really know how you're going to get there. I feel like thinking back, I'm like, I don't even know how I got here to the point where I'm about to study particle theory, which I've always wanted to do, and I never thought I would be good enough to do that. And I've talked to a few people who, I guess, people in the field in the past who had told me that I should just give up on theory, like I wouldn't be able to do it because of my grades or some reason. But I mean, I kept, even though it affected me and I doubted myself, I kept going anyway. And I mean, I'm here now, so I think I'm just going to keep pushing until I get to where I want to get, right? Because like you said, it's the passion that drives me in the end. Mm-hmm. And even if I doubt myself one day, the passion is still there, the interest is still there, and I'm going to keep going until I get there. But I mean, I think what you're talking about brings up a good point. In general, I know you're talking about like how you don't have any representation of like Indian American women, right? Specifically in astrophysics. And it's like, I see that as an issue at large too, with just women or minorities, right? It's like, if you don't have this representation or these role models, there's someone that is like you in some way culturally, right? Or you identify with, then that group of people, they're not really going to even realize that might be an option for them, right? So I think that's something that I think is really important to try to change, obviously. And I think that there needs to be an intervention at a younger age to expose minorities and women to all of the fields and let them know that this is possible for you, and then try to find some role models that you can show them, right? Some people have done important work in the field that maybe is not very public, but has been done, right?
Mm-hmm. Even just being present in the field, I think, makes a huge difference. Yeah. Like, I learned like only after, like towards end of undergrad, or like even just now in grad school, like going to conferences and like meeting, like, yeah, there are like female faculty members who have similar backgrounds to me, and it's cool to meet them, to be like, oh, I could be there in 10 years, or cool, you did that, you're at this, prestigious institution, like you get to run your own research. Like, so it's something that I only saw after I entered the field, but I think it would have a huge impact if I was able to see that from the beginning, from a young age, and to show your family and your community, like, look, it is possible. This person has done it. Actually, multiple people have done it, and like they live full and happy lives. So could I.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like your experience, it was great. It worked out, and it kind of pushed you because of your passion to keep going, even though you really weren't getting support from your family. But I mean, like, some people, maybe they don't get the support, and they may be interested, but not getting that support is enough to push them away from the field, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like, why do you think it worked out well for you? Like, what do you think was the factors that?
I think it's a combination of things. I think a lot of it has to do with me personally, in terms of I am very driven and stubborn, but it also has to do with I have been lucky to have some really good like mentors and advisors along the way who did recognize, like, okay, if you are interested in it, here's what you can do, or just giving me a chance to prove myself. That's the thing. A lot of people don't even get the chance to prove themselves. And like a huge part of how I got into astronomy and observing is because I started working for a research group where I would stay up all night and observe with the telescope. And you don't get paid for it. Like, only after a little while you get like some research credit for it. But it was very competitive. It was more like they just needed students to do busy work. And there was like maybe 20 students who were all doing this. And so in order to sort of differentiate from yourself from the crowd, you have to put in a lot of work. You have to get to know the people. And so for me, a lot of how I made it through astronomy was through like connecting with my peers and whoever was training me, asking them questions. How do you make it there? Asking, can I do an extra night? Can I do all this stuff? And so putting in the work and having people who are willing to give me a chance was a huge part of it. Okay. And like, that's one thing for astronomy, like the type of astronomy I do. I had to be in a position where I could go to campus and be there all night, get up and go to class the next day. And I was lucky in the sense of I had like a stable home, like a place to stay. I had access to like transportation. I didn't have to worry about like if I had like dependents or something else to worry about. Like I had the time and resources to do so, and a lot of people might not. Mm-hmm. And so there are all these barriers to access that I think are kind of invisible, that are just built into the way that a lot of this type of research and work is done, that is really not talked about a lot, and is kind of assumed that everyone sort of works the same, or everyone can put in the same amount, when there's so many other aspects of your life that, like, you know, not everyone can be nocturnal. I could be nocturnal because I was like 19 and like on my own and you know, could do that, but not everyone can, and that's something that I don't think is really acknowledged, especially in astronomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, totally. I think yeah, I mean, I was pretty fortunate too in my undergraduate. Like, a lot of my needs were met, and I kind of did a lot of work for free. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I really, yeah, I mean, I went, you know, I did my undergrad at Long Beach, and there weren't that many groups that you could do research with. So if you really wanted to set yourself up for a graduate school, it was kind of difficult. It's interesting. I mean, just a side note is that the only astrophysicist there was an Indian American, right? So just just for the record. But I did contact him. He never got back to me. But so I ended up doing research in condensed matter. Mm-hmm. But I ended up spending so many hours for like free getting paid nothing for that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I mean, it's pretty fortunate that I could live and still do that, right? So, you know, I totally see what you're talking about here. But, okay, I guess if we could take a step back for a second, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting in terms of you kind of have this goal and you're pushing forward and you're not sure, like, if it'll work out or not, but you're just going to keep doing it, right? And so this kind of makes me wonder, like, what is your perception of, like, your level of confidence, like, in the field? Like, do you feel like you're an expert? Do you feel like you're kind of ready to tackle whatever comes at you, or something else?
I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I do feel like I'm ready to tackle. I think that's how I'd put it. I think, so right now, like, as a graduate student is, to me, an exciting position to be in, because I'm at the point of where I have gone far enough to where I can claim, like, okay, I know something about what's going on. Yeah. Like, I've worked on projects, I have publications, like, I'm not completely clueless, but I'm still a student, so I have the freedom to ask questions, and if I ask for help, I don't think people might not look down on me as much for not knowing something, because I can play the student card. So I think being a grad student gives you that special kind of buffer. Before I came to grad school, there was a period of time where I was just working as an observer. And so it was this thing of where I was like, okay, I have a degree, I have training, and I am sort of teaching other people how to do stuff and managing things. So that was a position where I had to have answers and had to be in control of things for a while. And while doing that, I felt like, yeah, okay, I'm pretty in control. But then once I got to grad school and then started doing new projects, started doing classes and stuff, then I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I don't know any of this. So it was kind of this thing of when I was within my sphere of expertise, when I was within my little bubble, I felt solid, because it was a bubble I'd been in for a while. Yeah. But now moving on to grad school in the last couple of years, no, I have not felt like I know what I'm doing, but I've gotten more confidence in asking questions and more confidence in being okay with not knowing, because, like, no one inherently knows anything, and part of it, like, the scariest part is asking for help, and then if a person chooses to not help you, that's kind of on them. At least I could say I tried. Yeah. And that I reached out and I tried. That's a huge thing I've been trying to do lately, is just be okay with trying, because there are many things that are outside of our control. There are many, just, we may have a plan and it doesn't work out, and it might not be through any fault of our own. And so sometimes you just got to try.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important lesson on perspective, right? And that's one of the biggest things that I've had to learn for myself, right? And I guess there's probably like an XKCD comic about this, about like, you know, what you feel like you know versus like where you are in your trajectory of like actually learning these things. It's like, I mean, when I was completing my undergrad, I felt pretty confident about my knowledge of physics. I felt like I really gone through a lot and that like I kind of knew my shit. And then I come to graduate school and it's just like that perception, that worldview was completely shattered.
The bubble pops.
Right.
I got that too. Definitely.
Right, exactly. And then it's just like the carpet's taken out from under your feet and you're just like, whoa, what the fuck just happened? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's like, but looking back now, I could see how much bigger the picture is, how much of the world that we don't really know about. Mm-hmm. You know, and I really appreciate that sense of perspective now, having gone through those trials and tribulations. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have done it the other way in hindsight, because it's, I think, really valuable to understand like what you didn't know, right? And to understand and to have this new awareness of what the gaps were in terms of your knowledge, like how you shouldn't have been felt so comfortable in your knowledge. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's it's a pretty sweet feeling, I guess. And I'll take a break here. How do you feel about this, Irene?
Always throwing it back at me.
Yeah, I gotta probe you to jump in the pool.
I don't think I ever felt comfortable or confident in
including now.
Maybe I feel like I feel more confident in my ability to learn, I guess, but definitely not comfortable in the knowledge that I have, I guess, or confident in, I don't know how.
So knowledge as in the amount of facts that you know about the field.
Yeah.
Okay, so you feel like you feel comfortable in terms of the sense that you could teach yourself whatever you need to know, but there's just a lot of shit out there that you're not aware of.
Well, I don't know about teaching myself anything, but
for the most part, I speak in generalities.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I think that my confidence has definitely increased since coming here. Since starting grad school, I would say I had very low confidence in general in my abilities to do physics. So I never really even thought I would get it into grad school or even get this far. So, like I said before, the driving force was really my interest, and kind of underlying what's connecting all of our experience, right? And the role of consciousness and how it can be explained in terms of, like, let's say particle physics or fundamental physics. So I think that kind of that interest that I've always really had is kind of the driving force, and trying to learn the frameworks step by step, even though I have always seen myself as, I've always, like I said, had low confidence, believing that I don't really have the ability to really understand everything, comprehend it to the level that I need to be able to put these pieces together. But I know that because I'm so passionate about it, I kind of am now more confident that it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care if that is a reality or not. Let me just keep going until the point where, I feel satisfied, right? Mm-hmm. So it may not be getting that full goal, putting all the pieces together, but I'm sure that I'll be satisfied at some point in my life with what I've learned or had the chance to understand about the universe. So mm-hmm. I think that perspective is what I've gained so far in grad school.
I like your answer for that. Getting a satisfactory answer. That's good, because it's true. Like, it's hard to chase after a universal truth or something. It's a finish line that's always being moved
Yeah.
forward, or the definition of which is constantly changing
Yeah, exactly.
with new information. But it's true, a lot of it is like, for me, like what I consider my accomplishments so far, it's not necessarily, oh, I reached this milestone or whatever. It's, oh, I completed this task that I wanted to complete, or, oh, I got to have this cool experience or see this cool thing. And like, that's what keeps me going back for more. And yeah, it's kind of pursuit of like what makes you happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you brought up something interesting that I'm kind of reflecting on, as to like, you felt like you weren't going to make it into graduate school, and then you're just lucky to be here and stuff like that. And I'm just now becoming conscious in this moment of, yeah, it was a very like, it was a time for me personally where I felt like I didn't know if I was going to be here, and the chances of me ending up at where I am now is like, it was like my last chance, right? I was like this close to not being in graduate school, right? And so I think that's a pretty interesting place to be. I think that adds a little sense of gratitude in terms of my perspective. But I'm curious, Sahana, how was your experience applying to graduate school, and what were your feelings towards the...
It was hell. I never want to apply to graduate school again. Yeah, so for me, like coming out of undergrad, like my grades were not great. And so the application process was tough because for me, I knew my research was strong, but on paper, I think, like in hindsight, I think a lot of my applications were just kind of tossed out based on the grades or like GRE scores alone. And so number-wise, I wasn't a super competitive candidate in that way. So I applied to grad school twice. First time I applied to a few places, didn't get in, applied in a second time, and then was able to get into grad school. But it was a really difficult process, because also you, like, at least for me, I definitely tied a lot of it to my self-worth. Not getting in the first time was devastating, and it was hard because it's something I'd worked towards for years and years, and that is just the next step that you take. And I had worked really hard to get to that step, and then not making it made it feel like, does everything I worked on for the last like 7 years, does that all just go away now? And so deciding like, no, I'm gonna apply again, and not taking no for an answer was a conscious decision that I made, and that it took a lot of effort, and it definitely changed me. Like, I came out on the other side sort of realizing that, okay, my career is not who I am as a person, even though it's very closely tied, and it did feel like that for the longest time. It's important for me now as an adult to separate the two. And also, there's so much bullshit in the like graduate application process, or just the application process in general for universities. And it was really honestly the main part that pissed me off was the essay, where it was like, okay, tell us, you know, your personal history. Like, are you part of an underrepresented minority? You know, what is different about you? And this idea of having to like commodify your minorityness, or having to like basically perform for what is mostly white academic panels, and say like, my life was hard because I'm this, when really I'm very glad I'm this, and I'm not like, it's like, yeah, okay, it might be a bad thing in a larger context, but I hate that I have to cater to this certain viewpoint to get in. Say, please, sir, may I have some education? Like, so that was something that just, it really made me angry at the time, and something that I just kind of like was like, all right, I'm gonna get through, I'm gonna get in and keep going. But yeah, it sucked, and that's why I was like, all right, made it into a graduate program. I'm getting my PhD at this institution because I'm not writing another admissions essay again in my life. Yeah, like I do not want to do it. But it was really tough, and I mean, like at that time too is when I learned that like, okay, like I fell pretty hard, and like during the time of applying, like there were all those doubts from people around me. But then when it didn't work out, then they weren't like, oh, I told you so. It was more like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, here, try something else, or, take some time and then try again. So it made me realize, like, okay, like, just because your people might not be immediately supportive doesn't mean they're automatically going to kick you when you're down. And I'm glad that I did apply a second time and made it through, and it just kind of gave me an appreciation for wanting to be here. And also just talking about it has made me learn that, like, from people that I've met in grad school and in the field, like, there are many cases like this. A lot of people do come straight from undergrad, but there are a lot of people who don't. And now I value that time in between where I had to learn how to be a functioning human being and sort of learn how I react to when everything's gone into like a tailspin. And so I think that's definitely helped with a lot of the stresses in grad school of where we are thrown into the fire a lot of the times, and we deal with failure on such a daily basis, and learning how to not let that get to you, like learning how to separate your self-worth from that, and just basically when you get knocked down, saying, no, I'm just going to get back up and do it again and again and again for like 7 years, because that's what a PhD is.
Yeah. That's why the common joke among physicists is that you're a masochist, right? You kind of have to be.
Or that PhD stands for preferred hill to die on.
Right. And so here's where I think, Irene, you have a similar experience in terms of there was a gap between your undergrad and your graduate career, right? And so how do you think that experience between that gap has kind of put a frame on your experience in graduate school?
Well, I think I 100% absolutely needed it. It was like I would say like a spiritual gap. I would say in undergrad, I struggled a lot with like mental illness and stuff. So I did not do well in classes. I couldn't concentrate at all. I couldn't do my work. So a lot of the times I just dropped. I would take 2 classes for the semester because I couldn't complete more, and my grades weren't good. So I still had this passion for physics that I would think about, on my own. So it's like all the time that I had, thinking time that I had, that wasn't attributed to like dealing with my daily struggle to like kind of, just make it through the day. I would be thinking about consciousness or something like that. And I wouldn't really do my work. So it was still a passion there that I think I wanted to still pursue. And then I started getting some help like near my junior year. And then my grades, my senior year, like just complete contrast from before. So then I started to see that like I was actually capable. I just, had to work through a lot of stuff. So I graduated, my grades were not good. I definitely would have not gone into any grad schools with my grades. So I took 4 years off, basically, which was a lot of me doing interpersonal work, working through a lot of things, I guess, from my childhood that had built up and affected me at that point in my life. So then I had to work through a lot of stuff. I would say, through a whole spiritual journey these 4 months, trying to like put all the pieces of myself together so I could see like a full constructive view of who I was. And through that, I gained a lot of just skills on how to deal with any setbacks, right? So I think that then I didn't even apply to any grad schools. Originally, I applied to this program, the Bridge program. So, and I thankfully got in to this university. So I came here after those 4 years, and I definitely didn't feel like I was ready in terms of study skills, because I've had those mental issues for probably more than a decade at that point. So even in high school, I couldn't really concentrate too well on school, so I never really got study skills down. So that was definitely something that held me back at the beginning of grad school here, was not really being able to like structure myself well. I didn't have study skills, so I didn't really know how to study so well either. But I mean, I knew that I wasn't completely ready coming in, but I knew that I was at least spiritually and emotionally ready to come here, even though there were still some things lingering that I had to work through, but I thought it was like good enough. So I came here. I mean, definitely there had been some points where I got pretty low, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, I don't think I can do this. I was hard on myself, but I think that if I hadn't taken those 4 years off, I wouldn't have been able to work through all those things and like gain those skills to kind of work through failure, basically dealing with failure, right? And knowing what I should do to create a better structure for myself. So I laid all the groundwork there. So then when I came here, I was ready to build those study skills, build my profile, do well in classes. And I think that, I'm proud of myself for that. I think that I've come a long way, and I've actually been meeting the goals that I've wanted to meet the whole time that I never really thought. At some point, I didn't even think that was a possibility, and then now I'm like, oh wow, I'm doing it, So it feels really good to see that. So I think that, those 4 years were completely necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, like the way you're phrasing it now, like maybe it would have been useful for me, right? Having a gap year. It's because my experience is not that. Is I came straight from undergrad to this program, right? And so, I mean, this is maybe too many specific details, but I was part of some like scholarship program where I was required to apply to like at least 10 grad schools. So I wrote a shit ton of applications, and I was very motivated, and I had a lot of help. I had mentors helping me like draft my stuff, and I guess on some level I didn't really even consciously it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't get in. And I guess it was just kind of a slap in the face that's like, you didn't get in anywhere, right? Out of the 13 schools I applied to, or whatever the final number was, I didn't get into any of them. Luckily, this program that we're in has later applications, right? So it's like, okay, I have this fallback, I guess, and it kind of worked out, right? But the problem is the other slap in the face is when I got into graduate school is not having the time or the space to actually question that spiritual sense of myself, to actually examine how much my self-worth was tied to these notions, right? How much in my head I had built up like not getting into these grad schools really affected me, and doing well in classes, like how important it was to me, but unquestioned, right? Like, why was it important to me? And I think had I taken a gap year or something, I might have had some time to actually sit back and reflect on that. But because I didn't, it was kind of just like a bias in my head that just went unquestioned. And so, I don't know. That's just a hypothesis, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe I might advise someone to take a gap year if they have the choice, but I'm not sure.
Depends. I think I would. I mean, I've told multiple people, like, if you have time off between undergrad and grad, I'd recommend it. I mean, like Irene, like I also am glad that I had it. Like it was like at first not a choice, but it was also necessary. I felt very burnt out after undergrad and was very lost and depressed for a while, and it was tough. But also one thing that I think I learned during that time was in my interactions with other people. It was the first time in my life where I couldn't specifically tell them what I was doing or what I was going to do next. Yeah. And it made me like question and then realize like, yeah, okay, I do want to try to go for grad school. But also realizing that when you tell someone, I don't know, or I'm figuring things out, or like in between stuff, like that's still a valid answer. And I think before that time, if somebody told me like, oh, I was going to do this thing and it didn't work out, so now I'm just kind of adrift, me as being someone who always felt like I had a very clear path ahead of me would be super judgmental towards them and be like, oh, well, you're just a loser, you couldn't do it, like blah, blah, blah. And then when I realized like, oh, that's me for like over a year, then it made me realize like that's okay, and I should not judge people for not having everything on a perfect railroad track heading towards what we define as success. Yep. And in that time, like you said, like becoming spiritually and emotionally ready to take on the task of grad school, but also for me, like learning to appreciate just like, all right, we're in our 20s. This is a time of like growth and a little bit of freedom, but also like establishing our skills and being responsible and getting our lives together.
Yeah.
And so part of that year for me was also just learning like, okay, how do I be functioning? How do I figure out stuff like taxes and finances and all these things that you're kind of sheltered from in the student life. Like even as graduate students, most programs, graduate students get like, in physics at least, you get like a stipend, so you have some sort of income. Usually some sort of health insurance is offered through your program. If you're in a university town, you usually have housing near campus. So it's really like sort of a lot of aspects are continuing from your undergrad. So there have actually been studies about this. I don't remember the name of the actual paper, but there have been some studies on what this like delayed adolescence that is seen in PhD graduates.
Right.
It's because when you're in the student environment through pretty much age 30, you come out of school basically in your early 30s, and then you're basically like maybe emotionally or socially at like a 22-year-old. And that's something that's seen in academia. And I think like after coming to grad school, like I see it. I think it's definitely a thing that happens. And it's interesting talking to like my friends that I graduated from college with who are jobs. A lot of them are getting married now. And to me, I'm like, oh, you're an adult. I'm not an adult, but you're an adult. And I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. I've never thought about that. But yeah, now that you mention it, I would probably say it's the case that in terms of like professors in academia, I would say that maybe not in general, I don't want to like say anything inappropriate, but I mean, it's just like, I would say that there is like a lot of arrested development in terms of like emotional growth. And perhaps the whole reason for this podcast, right, is because these professors and advisors and people in academia are so kind of like emotionally unequipped, right? And whether that's like a byproduct of like necessarily going to grad school and having all these needs met for you, or like maybe that's like a selective bias because like you go into science and academia because you don't have those emotional skills or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I would be curious to see like what the research had to say in terms of like how far back that really sets you in terms of becoming an adult. Right.
Yeah. And like a lot of it also has to do with, I think, the way we handle responsibility and like what individual responsibility means within like this academic context. And yeah, it's something I think about too. Like I feel in some ways like I feel more grown up than certain people in our program, and I feel less grown up than certain people in our program. And it's interesting that even at this stage in our lives, I'm still using that grown up versus not grown up comparison to people in my vicinity. When my friends who are not in academia, they don't do that. After you graduate college, you get a job, you're just an adult. Everyone is just an adult. And like you might be like a couple years older here and there, you might be like, oh, I watched that in high school and you watched it in middle school, oh, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, everyone is just general adult. But we do still see this like age or at least like year hierarchy, like how we did in school, where it's like, oh, a third grader versus a first grader. In grad school, it's like a fifth year student versus a first year student. And that's wild because we're all like a range of ages in terms of how long we've been alive. But yeah, I'm going to find that study and send it to you.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll post it in the notes of the episode. But so I think in the conversation we've kind of maybe addressed some points here or there, but perhaps if I were to press you, like what your perspective is on perhaps the biggest problem for the field in terms of culture, what do you think that might be?
Let me think for a sec.
Well, to give you some time to think.
Yeah.
Right.
I have an idea.
My answer is kind of clear, right? Is It's why we're making the podcast. Right. The biggest problem is, in my perspective, not creating a welcoming and supportive environment. Right. Because me personally, I could have used that environment. Like, there is a stark contrast between my undergrad program and my program here in terms of the environment. My undergrad program felt very welcoming and supportive, and I had a big social network, and everyone felt like very cooperative. And maybe this is true of grad schools in general, or just like more selective programs that are more competitive. But I did not feel that way here, right? And for one reason or another. It's speculation as to why. But I think as a result of that is I fell into a very dangerous situation personally, right? And we know of people who have, like, for instance, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but like with what happened to Alex, right? And just, I can only speculate as to his reasons for, what he did. But I mean, me trying to empathize and put myself in his shoes, right? I think that it can't be ignored, the impact of the culture and like how welcoming and supportive the environment is, and what influence that could have played in the chain of events that occurred, right? And so to me, the most important thing is that I think for like humanity, we're going to have to really shift gears here really soon, right? It's like, we're going to come to realize that a lot of these jobs that we have people doing they don't really do anything. Yeah, jinx, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to have to really promote people thinking creatively about problems, right? And so the fact that we're like dissuading people or discouraging people from entering the field at all, to me feels like a major disservice, right? It's like, why are we doing that? It's like, it's really confusing to me. And so
I agree wholeheartedly. I think what I would say is the one huge problem with our field is how we prioritize results in a certain way. One thing that I've personally seen at conferences or at talks is when there's a speaker up there, how the speaker is treated a lot of times, has to do with what institution they're from. A lot of times what their like demographic is. If they're going to be respected by, honestly, all the old white men in the crowd because it's a physics talk. And also with a lot of times in our field, a non-result is a result in itself.
Right.
Finding a way to not do something or ruling out a way to do something is a result in itself. But we see it as a failure, and we try to prioritize these like big conclusive results. And so it can lead to this type of sensationalism that makes it such that when you find something interesting or you find something you don't understand, you might be hesitant to move forward with it, or you might get shut down because it's not conclusive, it's not going to make money, it's not going to make waves. And so this stifling of things that won't bring sensational results, I think, is a huge problem. And it is also like a social barrier too. Because if you're the kind of person who has the social standing within the department to say, you know what, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm going to publish this anyways, not everyone can do that. Yeah. And not everyone needs to have like a personal armory built in order to be able to do that. And so there's this definitely this sort of suppression of creativity and pursuit that I think happens. And it also has to do with in the way that I think that our classes are taught, or us as students, when we do our homework problems. So we've had some classes that are incredibly difficult and we've had some classes that are a little bit less difficult. So ones where the homework problem follows a very set path that was discussed in class, those ones are nice because you can accomplish them, you can do them, and then you're going to get a good grade, so you're not too worried about it, or it's not keeping you up at night. Unlike the class where a professor might give you a homework assignment where there might not necessarily be a known answer, or they've given you something that you haven't seen before, and you have to try to make jumps to try to get there. And at least in my experience, I don't think I've gotten a single one of those right, full credit. Like, I'm lucky if I get even partial credit on any of those. But I think that kind of thinking is what will train us to address actual real problems out there. So it's this weird hand-holding thing that I personally feel, of where we learn one method in class, but then in research we have to implement an entirely different one where we fail on a daily basis. And then I'm sitting here going like, okay, that didn't work again. Or like, I tried something else. I still can't get this thing to work for months. And like, I don't have a result. And that is a really scary situation to be in. And I think like it's very easy for people to want to leave that kind of environment. It's not an environment that has good retention. It's not an environment or like a way of thinking that makes you want to stay or encourages you to stay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to add to that, it's like that is what I perceive as a big problem with being like a professor, right? Is that's one major reason why I'm skeptical as to whether or not I want to be professor, is because of this biasing towards positive results.
Yeah.
Right. And if we're scientists, like, let's be scientific about it. Like, it just seems, I mean, I guess I understand like what the motivation is behind that, but it's like, for instance, my advisor is in core collapse supernovae. And I know specifics in that group because he's talked about the papers where I can see the bias in terms of like, they have to run these like super expensive simulations, right? In terms of like millions of computer hours. And they specifically, so they're basically, the idea is they simulate the evolution of a star, right? And they have the choice of choosing the initial conditions of like, how massive is the star, you know, how old is it, and so on. And they specifically choose, like I could see from the plots, that they specifically choose stars that they know are going to explode, right? And they're neglecting like a large proportion of the distribution that might lead to negative results.
Yeah.
But the result is that we don't really know what's going on because, you know, people are only choosing the ones that they know are going to explode.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't really probe the theory if you only have like a quarter of the picture, right? And so it's really frustrating to just sit back and see from an outside perspective like this bureaucratic bullshit like unfold. And so it's just like, oh, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. And like, I'm definitely curious to see what you have to say about from the theory side, but from like an observational experimentalist side, like I feel myself getting jaded like the more I go through this stuff, because like I think coming in as a student, you're like, all right, pursuit of knowledge, like, yes, like I want to find out the truths of the universe, like really uncover what's going on. But like after a few years, you're just like, all right, I'm just going to write something so I get this funding, or I get this proposal too. Like you have to convince them that you're a safe bet. And like it does involve compromising your principles a little bit. And I think that's something that like is sort of dissonant with the way that modern physics is taught and perceived, is because we all know about all these figures in the last like 100 years who discovered all this cool stuff. They all have got their theorems, like we've got pictures of them on the wall, everyone knows their names and stuff, and they found these really groundbreaking results. And so everyone's trying to match that, but we don't address the amount of trial and error and the amount of like selection bias, like you said,
Right.
that goes into it, and we're all expected to just do it, but do it on the DL and then keep moving.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I don't know if we talked about that idea before, where it's like you're saying, everyone, there's like this model of like the physicists where, you know, it's like these people who kind of, it seems like have worked mostly alone and have come up with these like great theories, like amazing theories, right? And it's like, nowadays, I think there's so much manpower that it's like that doesn't even need to be necessary anymore. Like if people collaborated more and felt safe to bring their ideas to the table, I think the idea where you're talking about there's like a repression, it's like a stifling, and it's something that I personally have felt, and I'm sure other people feel as well. I mean, I think even with theory, it's riskier too. talking about your intuitions or ideas about how something came to be, or the pieces that come together to form this thing. Because you're afraid that maybe you feel like you don't know all of the pieces that come together. You don't know all the physics fully. You don't know all of the theory. Because, I mean, obviously, it's very specialized. You're not going to know everything. And I feel like you're afraid to even bring up these ideas that you have because you feel like someone may say, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Like that's so wrong. Like those pieces don't even come together. And then now they perceive you in a very negative light, as in this person has like bogus ideas, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that is very negative because I think, like you said before, it's a stifling of the creativity, right? And I think that those ideas are important. Even if they're not exactly correct, it could spark another idea in someone else that might lead them to maybe alter the idea in a way that might make more sense with a theory if they have more knowledge, right, about that field. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of ideas that I have that I've never in my life even thought of talking to anyone about because I feel like it's probably stupid. They're gonna think I'm dumb. They're gonna completely dismiss me as a theorist, and then now my dream of being a theorist is gonna fall apart because they're not gonna think I'm capable of being a theorist, right? And I think that has happened. I think people who are maybe more vocal and like talking about their ideas, and people have heard them, like, you know, maybe respected people in the field, and maybe they're like, oh yeah, I don't think that person's not talking very clearly. It doesn't seem like they really have enough knowledge, so I don't think they're right for theory. So I think that that's not good. I think that we should be welcoming people's creative ideas and helping them form them. Either say, oh, that intuition's interesting, let's look into it, or saying, no, actually, I don't think it fits in with a theory because of this, but not judge them for that, right? So if anything, you should be like, oh, wow, this person is like thinking creatively, you know. They have intuitions, and they're trying to learn how to discern whether it's a good intuition or bad intuition, and you should be fostering that. And I think that it's something that people should be supportive of, and we don't see that directly in the field, and I think it's necessary. So
I think I caught on to what you said there about like, oh, this person should not be a theorist, or like when you said that, that's not the first time I've heard that this week. And I think that's also a huge part of it, and that we have these ideas of, okay, this is how a theorist thinks, this is how an experimentalist thinks, and especially at our stage as grad students, where we have faculty members overseeing our progress and our growth in the field, when they can step in and say things like, I don't think you're cut out to be a theorist, that's them making a judgment saying, okay, you are not following the patterns of theorists before.
Yes, exactly.
And I don't think that's really great, because how is a field supposed to pursue and go further if everyone is thinking the same, if you're having cookie cutter people each time? And like that I think is sort of slowing it down by narrowing, or the only word I can think of is typecasting, to be honest, like typecasting certain types of physicists. I feel like
they're not even aware how necessary diversifying the field in terms of mind, right? In terms of how people think. And like that's exactly what you see as a majority. It's like this one type of mind is the theorist mind. That is not true. Like you said, for there to be innovation, you're gonna have to start considering all of the diversity that you can have in mental thought processes, right? And I think that a lot of different types of minds can contribute things that you may not even imagine, right?
Exactly, yeah. And like diversity of thought, but all people who are trying to pursue the same goal is what's going to get you to the next place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And to just toss in one more way of rephrasing it is, I think as a society that we're going to have to start placing much more emphasis on thinking creatively, right? Thinking about novel ways of solving these problems, because I guess I think the issues is that just another way of saying the same thing is that we're kind of incentivizing real minuscule growth in terms of the field, right? You're basically incentivized as a professor or an academic to basically leave this tiny little edge of parameter space in whatever thing you're studying so that you have some job security, right? In terms of like, you're not really progressing the field that much, and you know it, you're kind of aware of that, but at least you have something else to look at, right? And but these theorists that we kind of idolize in physics, like Einstein and Dirac and stuff, they're going to have to come from really novel ways of thinking about the universe, right? And that's the only place that we're going to find that type of thinking, right? I mean, I guess, yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of these people that have these novel ways of thinking about the universe that really transform the world kind of fall outside of the traditional academic, right? I don't think that's a coincidence.
So speaking of job security, I have a question for both of you.
Yes.
What do you think of tenure?
I think I've never really thought about it. I guess thinking right now out loud seems kind of bullshit, because it's just because there have been professors I've known in my experience that directly take advantage of it. That no longer, like, I don't know at what point they stopped taking their job seriously, but at some point they stopped taking it seriously. Like, they no longer cared about teaching. They no longer cared about really doing what they were there supposed to be doing, right? And I guess there are other professors that, you know, have really been like kind of activists and kind of like really supportive of the community in my experience, that were also tenured. And so maybe it's just like an amplifier in terms of like your own biases, right? So like whether you personally feel like really motivated or really lazy, it's gonna like multiply that by 10. But it's probably not a good idea, I guess, thinking about it now. I mean, I don't know.
Irene, what do you think?
I mean, I haven't thought about it either, so it's good you bring this question up.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're saying, it amplifies this person's ideals or perspectives, right? I think that's interesting, because I think there are people who really are making a contribution, I think, that are interested in educating people specifically and coming up with a better way of doing that, right? And trying to make a more inclusive environment. Those are the people that if they challenged the status quo, they may, depending on the university, they may or may not want to remove the person from the university. And if they're tenured, they would not, right? They cannot do so. So that would be something that would be beneficial in that way. But then we have the other end of it, someone who does not care about what they're doing, or doesn't care about educating the students. And I don't know about their research work, but kind of, in my eyes, and maybe the dead weight, I shouldn't say that. I feel like that's kind of offensive. And in that case, I think if it's harming the university, then obviously it's harmful. So I can see both sides of how it could be helpful. Specifically, if you're trying to make a change in the university, then you can at least know you have job security there, right?
Yeah.
As you're trying to make this change. So I'm not sure about it.
So why do you ask?
I ask because it's something that I've thought about a lot, and is something that I'm conflicted about. Because on one hand, and I can admit this is probably a selfish opinion, but I like the idea of tenure. As somebody who wants to go into academia and probably be a professor, the idea of like the ultimate job security very much appeals to me, and is something that, like, okay, that's something I can work towards, and once you get it, that is just kind of a worry you don't have to deal with anymore. And then you also have the opportunity to, like you said, try to exact change or exert your influence over a department. But on the other hand, so if someone gets tenured, maybe they're going to be there for the span of, like, let's say 60 years at a department. And one thing that I've personally seen in universities is, okay, there might be a professor, when they come in and they get tenure, they are considered very liberal, and like super, like, everyone's on board, like, yes, okay, you're pushing towards the right thing, but they might not change that much over the next 50 years because they're in the same environment the whole time. And academic society, or the social norms within academia, don't change that fast. And so by the time that they're, like, at the very ends of their career, they've become the conservative, like, old stalwarts who are justifying it as being like, well, when I joined the department, like I said we should let women in, like, and kind of sort of assuming that they're still the liberals because they were when they came in, and because they've gained a certain level of seniority within the department, that cannot be checked.
Yeah.
And so I think it also stifles changing with the times. And again, that's kind of a case-by-case basis. There are a lot of professors who do change with the times, and there are a lot of good reasons or there are a lot of people that should be tenured, but it's an interesting dynamic because there's really no other career path where you get that kind of job security.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of why academia has the culture that it has, is because when there are problematic elements, sometimes they're protected by the institution. They're built into the institution. And you can't oust the tenured professor the way you can just get rid of a bad CEO.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, that seems like a very compelling reason not to have tenure. If you have like, I was just thinking of the case of someone lazy, but if you have someone that is actively toxic, right, as whoever comes to your mind at this moment, who represents that, I have mine, were to be given tenure and to be ingrained into the institution, that would be perpetuating something that would be a travesty for education and for physics for a very long time, right? And to me, that is very concerning, right? That would be perhaps the most compelling reason for me as to why it shouldn't be the case. So because I think really there's probably some idiom or adage here about, like, one bad seed can, taint. I feel like one toxic person can really ruin like a lot of good intentions from like the rest of the community.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you have to be really mindful as to like who gets that privilege.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know tenure is not something that a lot of academic institutions give out lightly, but like another argument for tenure that I've heard before has been, okay, once a professor obtains tenure, then they're not worried about the job security. So they're more free to pursue research interests, or they will devote more to research interests because they're not worried about sort of bureaucratic stuff, which I would argue, like, okay, yes, I think that's true in some sense, but I think that kind of makes it sound like there's some shortage of brilliant people in the field. There's some shortage of thinkers. And if there is a shortage of thinkers, shouldn't we be addressing that first before saying that, okay, we need to keep this person for life so that they will be relaxed enough to actively pursue research? Shouldn't we think about, okay, why are they not free to think or like bring new ideas to the table from the beginning? Why do they have to wait until they're protected to try to say something revolutionary?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that's a way of addressing the problem that we've been discussing, right? In terms of lack of creativity in the field, but as we've explored, it seems a little lacking in some senses, at least from my perspective, right? So, I mean, as you pointed out, like, I guess the solution that I would opt for is perhaps much more naive and optimistic, but basically getting everyone on board with, bringing everyone into the field and, just promoting this diverse way of thinking. Right. And so we'll see how it plays out in the history books, but hopefully we're right.
Yeah.
That's the world I want to see. So
yeah. I'm always like, tenure is one of those things that, like, depending on what day of the week it is, I'm for it or maybe against it. But yeah, just that idea of you could have a job for life. Like, the only other thing I can think of is like Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, exactly. That's what came to my mind.
Yeah. Like, where, like, it's a type of job security that you don't get anywhere else. And like, that's the ultimate, right? You want to be able to tell your parents, like, I'm good. I never have to worry about a job again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just like thinking about Supreme Court justices, I mean, that frustrates me too. Like,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
like it doesn't seem right in that instance either. So I don't know if it's a good idea in general.
Yep.
Because like, given our current administration, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
And
all
the fact
shit they've
that
pulled this week.
certain people can be appointed for life,
Yeah.
is frustrating.
Yep.
So, yeah, doesn't seem right.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot can be done in a human lifetime.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this might be a good moment to switch gears. Something that I think you're interested in, that we might share, is an interest in aliens.
Oh, hell yeah. Let's get into this.
Right. So, do you want to come at it from like astronomy, physics side, or just more like conspiracy stuff?
Well, there's a point where those blur together, and that's where I'd like to start.
Okay, well then you guide me. What
Well,
got you interested in aliens and stuff, and
I mean,
what's your perspective on aliens in general? I guess you could
my
say.
perspective on aliens is, so I feel, so one thing I will say is like we're all like in our 20s, and so at like this age, like we grew up in a world where we knew that the universe was really, really big. So we don't have to deal with stuff like the Fermi-Paradox or whatever. Like, we know the universe is huge. And so I think for me, like, from a very young age, like, aliens were never a question. I've always believed they're out there, and I don't understand why I have to say I believe in them when it seems like an undeniable fact that there has to be some other life form somewhere out there. It's too big for there not to be. And the fact on Earth, we have so many different types of life forms on this one rock that has characteristics and materials that can be found in many other places. Why is this the only place? It can't be. And so for me, it's mainly like a numbers argument of that, like, all right, we are not necessarily unique. And also, just because aliens are out there, I don't think that means we're going to necessarily find them and interact with them.
Right.
The universe is huge. Human timescales are fairly short compared to the universe. There's an Onion article that says something like, our solar system is the cosmic equivalent of a fucking cul-de-sac, which I agree with. That's what I always think of where it's like, there's this level of like human hubris of where like we've expanded to the cosmos. We like haven't even made it out of our arm in the spiral galaxy. We've barely made it out of our local neighborhood. And it's just the kind of thing where like I know aliens are out there in my heart. I know that there are other life forms. I don't know if we're gonna meet them. Even if we do meet them, I don't know if humans as a whole are gonna agree with each other and be like, yeah, of course. Like the Pentagon apparently has been releasing footage and all these reports saying, yeah, we found UFOs, and like we're all just like, so like we got other shit going on, like are you sure? Like we're not gonna believe them. So I'm just like, yeah, I think like aliens are out there, it's just humans are the problem. I would very much like to meet an alien. I think that would be awesome. I don't know what that would entail, but yes, please.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with most of your perspective on that. But the one thing that I found interesting is that how, given the statement of how we're given where we are in time, that we don't have to deal with the Fermi-Paradox. Why is it that you feel that way? Could you explain more?
Yeah. Yes. So the Fermi-Paradox like says that we like if aliens were out there, we would have detected them by now.
Right.
Basically.
Right. So here, can I lay it out in a little more detail?
Yes,
I'm sure you know, but just so we're on the same page
and
everyone listening to the podcast.
Yes.
So the Fermi-Paradox, as I understand it, is kind of an argument. It's basically, given the technological progress that we have experienced as human beings, right, that's followed kind of like an exponential increase, right? And the fact that, I mean, I guess physics wasn't even invented till 400 years ago, basically. This whole field is only 400 years old. But anyways, the point is that given this exponential increase, you would expect that if there were an intelligent civilization in our galaxy somewhere, or the universe in general, is that it would propagate out from its home planet at an exponential rate, right? And so given the fact that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, that like if you think about the human perspective in terms of like at what point we will become a spacefaring civilization and perhaps explore the galaxy, you know, perhaps you could hypothesize with some relative degree of certainty that we can do that in the time span of several millions of years, order of magnitude, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. It doesn't really matter because we're talking about tens of billions of years in context, right? So then the paradox is, why don't we see aliens?
Yeah.
Right. So as you put it, you know, rather in layman's, like really quickly, that's basically what it means, right? So why is it that you feel that this is a non-issue?
So the main issue I have with it is assuming intelligent alien life forms are going to be anything like humans.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
like humans in the sense that they want to explore, or in other senses?
In the sense that they want to explore and will be branching out in a way that's recognizable to us.
Okay. As in, okay.
As in like, okay, so what we might picture is, all right, we've got spaceships coming in and they're going to be like, greetings, humans, we are from blah, 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 blah. Like trying to make contact with us and assuming that they even communicate in that way in, like, let's say a verbal form or in such a way where their communication pattern or method involves establishing contact and addressing one party to another. So just the fact that we are assuming that this intelligent life form is going to match patterns that are basically human. So that's
what I might say is that it's not necessarily human, right? It's that we have been searching for extraterrestrial life in terms of like the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So we would expect to see signs in terms of like perhaps planet transfers. You know, there was some time when we thought we saw a Dyson sphere or something like that. That would be an example of some way that doesn't necessarily involve direct communication with an alien that we might see.
Yeah. I think it also, the other problem that I have with it is that it doesn't leave any wiggle room for what we might not account for and what these aliens would be like. And like, I even have a problem with how are we even defining life forms? Like we have trouble doing that here on Earth.
Right,
with certain types of bacteria and like plants. Even if we found a plant, would we recognize it as a plant in a life form somewhere else? Or are we just searching for something to categorize as an alien because it fits our notion of what an alien should be? Right. So I think my main problem with it is the human bias aspect of it. And also the fact that like the universe is big. And if we are assuming that this is an intelligent species that's capable of transport, whether that transport is greater than speed of light or not is a whole other thing. But assuming that they are confined to the speed of light the way that we currently are, it'll still take them a really, really long time to get here. Right. And then, like, what if they already came? What if they showed up in, like, the year, like, 200 or something, and we're like, oh, okay, and then like moved on. Like that still counts within relatively modern history. And then they leave. Like we could have had the contact and just it was never recorded, or maybe they contacted a part of the world. Maybe they landed in like the Amazonian rainforest or something, and that knowledge is only held with like an isolated group of people or a group of people who have since been like wiped out for some reason or suppressed. And so part of me is also like, all right, this is also assuming that when we make contact with this alien life form, that it's going to be undeniable and that we will have record of it and it will be established that these are aliens.
So is the assumption then that we might have already seen aliens and we don't know it?
Yeah. Or we might know it. We might just not believe the people that are telling us. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I forget the guy's name from Ancient Aliens. I really wanted to quote his name. No?
I don't remember his name.
Yeah, I don't remember his name either.
Stephanopoulos or something. I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah.
But, okay. Have you ever tried to calculate the Drake equation for yourself?
No, I have not.
Okay, but you're aware of what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so I took an astronomy class where we had to come up with our own estimate for the Drake equation.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the
That's
context.
cool. I like that.
Yeah.
That you did that.
Right. So the context is Sir Francis Drake, who basically founded SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Basically set up this equation that's supposed to estimate the number of intelligent species that are in our galaxy, right? As a way of like kind of order of magnitude dealing with the Fermi-Paradox and stuff of the nature. And so, I mean, the thing is there's a lot of parameters, right? And there's some, as you indicated at, that are very not constrained at all. The uncertainty is probably, you know, I don't know, 10 to the 7 or something. but right, so we're dealing with like really small statistics here. So it's kind of like you could get very different answers for this. So
Yeah.
that's why it's an interesting exercise. But when I went through it personally and I tried to apply it to our galaxy, I found that the number I came up with was that there were 2
alien civilizations.
2 intelligent civilizations in the galaxy, in the Milky Way.
Including us or in addition to us?
Well, that would have to include us. And also, that is within the time step of 13.7 billion years.
Oh, okay.
So it may be the fact that they could have lived and died out long ago, or they have yet to even be born and come about. Well, right. So anyways, me going through the numbers myself, trying to be as conservative as I could, led me to the conclusion that maybe it's a little less likely than I was inclined to believe it was, right? Because I was given this notion from, I guess, popular science before I even took the class, and of like, you're dealing with such big numbers, right?
Yeah.
And my own conclusion was in contrast to that, right? But I guess the other comforting notion, I guess, if you want to believe in aliens, is that this is one galaxy, right? And there are, you know, many, many, many more galaxies out there in the universe.
Yeah.
And so even in the case where if you get 2 from the Drake equation, you're still not out of luck.
Yeah.
In terms of finding alien civilizations.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. It's finding them. That's
Right.
the other question.
Right.
I think that's the part that I get hung up on the most. Or that's the part of aliens that I'm kind of like, oh, okay. Because, like, I do think that they're out there, but I don't know if we'll reach each other in time for our species to still be around. Or, you know, like, time is a huge part of it. And as, like, mortal beings, we're also, I think, implicitly assuming that they're mortal, too. Or that they have finite lifespans.
Yeah.
And, well, okay, I guess that's more of a philosophical question right there, too.
Right.
Because a lot of our intelligence as humans have to do with the fact that we are born and then we die. And, like, as intelligent creatures, like, our mortality is a part of how we think.
Yeah.
But if we find something that we would recognize as intelligence, but their intelligence is different because they live on much longer timescales, or maybe they haven't died yet, or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ways out of the Fermi-Paradox. Like, you know, maybe like I could foresee a case where, you know, where we personally become interested in like VR, right? Where we all become plugged into the matrix, so to speak, right? And we can enjoy, you know, much more, I guess, limitless type of world, right? And not be bound by our bodies or our biological constraints.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you can still explore the universe, right? In terms of like, if you could ever upload your consciousness to like a computer, then you could beam it at the speed of light to wherever, and then explore. Like, say you have a station somewhere, like far in the far reaches of the galaxy, you can beam to and from, and it probably wouldn't leave much of a trace to be detected by, you know, other civilizations such as our own.
Yeah.
Right. So it's pretty. There's a lot of interesting ways of going about it. This is just a side note, totally not for the podcast, but How are you doing on the 3-body problem?
Oh, I have to read the second one. I requested it from the library.
Okay, I didn't know
Yeah.
they had it at the library.
I think it might be the library back home. I use the Overdrive app, so you get ebooks. Yeah, they didn't have. They have like the first and third in the public library here. So I'm like, all right, well, I need to read the second one. But I've been waiting. I'm thinking about rereading 3-Body Problem again before the second one, just so I remember what happens and get all the
You
details.
have the second one, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could borrow
Do
it
you have the
from me.
first one?
I have all 3, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay, I might do that. Because the other one I was thinking about rereading recently is the Foundation trilogy.
Okay.
That have either of you read that? It's like one of Isaac Asimov's like big ones, and it basically just talks about these civilization over the course of thousands of years, and I will say it's dense. It's a long read, but it's definitely one of those books that like while reading it, I have to like stop for a second and just like sit down with how like profound it got for a second, or how you watch this whole thing play out over the course of like one lifetime. And there's a character who's like a hero in their lifetime, but then you flash forward like 1,500 years later, and then like in hindsight they've become the villain based on whatever is happening at that point there. And how these different civilizations handle things like first contact or dealing with life forms beyond their own.
Yeah.
And I think it brings up a lot of really interesting philosophical questions and quandaries, and it definitely made me think about like, all right, so when we do consider things on these thousands and thousands of year timescales, like a huge part of what we consider important now is based on what we think of now, and like we just take things from the past and future and sort of morph them into what we think about now.
Right.
And so that's why I think aliens are like always a fun topic to talk about, because we live in a day and age where they're not a confirmed aspect of our reality. But this conversation would be really, really different maybe, let's say 5,000 years in the future, when aliens are a part of it.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, if you like 3-Body Problem, I think you'd like that one.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, just the context, because I failed to give it at the start, is the 3-Body Problem is a trilogy about a science fiction trilogy about basically first contact with aliens, an alien civilization that happens to be nearby at Alpha Centauri, one of our nearest stellar systems to our current location. And I just bring it up because the second book offers a solution to the Fermi-Paradox that I think is very interesting to consider. But I will refrain from mentioning it since you have yet to read it.
We'll pick that conversation up in the future after I read it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's a great book. I am going through the third book right now. I am almost done, 2/3 the way done, or something like that. It's a great read, can't put it down. It's really exciting. So I look forward to when we could talk about that again. Maybe we'll bring it back up.
I'm definitely on a summer reading binge. Been doing a lot of mythology recently, so I'm going to get back to sci-fi soon.
Right. So Irene, let's get your perspective. Right.
Yes.
So how do you... I understand that you feel like you're not in astrophysics or astronomy or whatever, so maybe you don't feel qualified to talk about these things. But what is your gut intuition, given what we've been talking about? Like, are there aliens out there? What do you think about the Fermi-Paradox? Is it bogus? What do you think?
I really kind of agree with Sahana on a lot of the things she said. So I think that there are other life forms, intelligent life forms out there within time and space, within the years and also within our universe space. I think that we may, like you mentioned, we may be expecting communication from them in a particular way that I feel like if they're going to communicate with us or travel such long distances, then that communication would probably look a lot different than what we're expecting, right? So maybe we're not even looking for that communication in the right way. So I think that, I don't know what else to say. I think you summed it all up perfectly.
Like, what would you do if an alien just like showed up in like 5 minutes at the front door. Like, how would you, as an intelligent being on planet Earth, react to that, do you think?
I'd be pretty excited internally because that I've always would want to meet another life form for sure. And then I'd probably invite them in to have some cheese and wine. And they'd be like, sorry, we don't have cheese and wine where I come from. We can't even digest food, so maybe they'd speak to me telepathically, who knows, right? And then I'd try to figure out about their culture, you know, where they are, how much they've gone through, how much they gotten in terms of exploring, you know, the mechanisms of the universe. They're probably way ahead of us if they were able to travel here, right? I mean, and yeah, I mean, just get to know, you know, what they're like, the culture, the advancements. And I guess I would also wonder what they were doing and what they expect, I guess, from our meeting.
Yeah.
So
I mean, one thing I've thought about that you just made me think of is, why do we care about aliens? Why do we want them so bad? Like, why does it matter to us that other intelligent life forms exist out there? And I think, like, the fact that you mentioned, like, you would ask them about their culture is, like, one of the first things you'd ask them is a huge part of it. Like, we want to recognize that, like, okay, other beings do this too, but it is something that I wonder, like, why do I want aliens so bad? I don't have a very good answer, but
I feel like for me, it's like this my pursuit of knowledge. Like I said before, like I'm driven to understand the mechanisms of the universe, right? And like I know that we're at a place where there's obviously, like we said, there's always gonna be more and more and more to know. And I feel like if this being that knows maybe a large leap more, where in my lifetime I could never get there, and they all of a sudden come to my doorstep, I'd be so excited for them to clue me into the, like, whatever thousands of years that I could never learn, right? But now they have all of this knowledge, and at least I could then get to a point like, oh wow, and see whether, you know, maybe what I thought matched up with what they actually discovered. And I think that it's just really stems at wanting to know more, you know, wanting to know more. How is this universe constructed?
Okay. Well, then say hypothetically the alien walks in the front door, right? And you're offered one question to ask about anything in your understanding of physics that you would like to know more about. What would you ask?
I would ask for the theory of everything, because I feel like with that if you have that, you can put all the pieces together to explain all these phenomena and combine them in one, right? So we could even explain consciousness if we had the theory of everything. We could explain like theory for the black holes and dark matter.
Is that really one question though, Irene? You're like, tell me everything.
Right.
Like,
it is one question though.
It is technically one question.
So can I just clarify your definition of the theory of everything, right? So because I think in physics, we tend to refer the theory of everything as the theory that unifies all the forces that we know of, right? Gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak force, right? That is typically what I think of when I hear the theory of everything. Is that the way is that what you're thinking? Or are you thinking like a more broader, like literally everything, how that connects?
No, I'm talking about that. And then possibly if there happened to be any other forces that we disregarded, we didn't know about or something, they would have that knowledge, because theory of everything means that you figured out all those pieces, you put them together. If you have that fundamental piece, everything can flow out of that. So they may not have that, so they may still be
that's an answer in
trying
itself,
to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, oh, you worked like, you know, you're whatever, a million years ahead or something, and you still don't know the answer to that question. Then that's an answer in itself, like you said. And then I'd be like, oh, well, that's good enough to know. I would also want to know where they are, but I guess I can only ask one question. So
Yeah.
I kind of have to gamble on that one. So I might have to rethink that. How to ask it to get some information, right?
Yeah. Interesting. Sahana, anything different you'd ask?
Yeah. Well, actually, when you said theory of everything, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. I would have asked, like, what is the largest and smallest thing you know of?
Oh.
Just to get an idea, like,
Yeah.
what are your bounds?
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting, right? could confirm or deny string theory, or if there's something even smaller. Right? Yeah,
or bigger
right.
than like the observable universe or our idea of a universe.
I mean, yeah, I'd like also
Right.
like to know if they were able to transcend dimensions or something, or they know that there's, you know, multiverses, like not just our universe, but multiple, and they've been able to like jump from one to the other or something.
Yeah.
Found a
and
way to do
they
that.
have the same three-dimensional spatial awareness that we think within?
Yeah.
Right.
Do big and small even have, do big and small even mean anything to them?
Yeah. Okay. Are there any loose ends with aliens that you want to tie up?
Okay, if any aliens are listening to this podcast, if it gets broadcast far enough out there, hello. You are welcome here anytime. Be careful of some of the stuff flying in the atmosphere. But if you make it to ground level, you got a few friends, okay? But like, please don't come kill us, but also please come visit. All right, that's all I have to say to the aliens.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point as to like this whole UFO prospect that I hadn't considered till just now about space junk.
Yeah,
Right,
that's a
and-
whole thing. Good job,
right.
humans.
And how basically we're basically littering, you know, our upper atmosphere with, you know, refuse, right? To the point where soon it's going to be pretty difficult to leave to outer space, right? And so that also works the other way then, right? Like if aliens wanted to visit Earth for these UFOs to come in for us to record, they'd have to work around all the space junk. And so maybe that's inadvertently going to dissuade some, you know.
Exactly.
aliens
Maybe
from
they fly
visiting.
by and go, oh, I don't want to scratch my spaceship. We're leaving.
Yeah.
It's costly.
Yeah,
Oh, look, it's a dump. Or-
exactly.
Yeah, it's just a dump.
Yeah.
Oh, it's for the dump planet, huh?
Yeah, we got to clean up our act. Right?
Yeah, but I mean,
Morals.
it also begs the question, as humans get more into space travel, will we be more inclined to do it? I think about for us now, we're excited about it because it's not something we really do that often. But say we get into space, we've got our fucking launch site at the moon and all of that. There's an interplanetary railway. So maybe a kid like 1,000 years from now, to which this is very commonplace, they wouldn't care about it.
Yeah.
Be like, ugh, I don't want to go to space. Like, we had to go there last week. Like, like, do you think the more we do it, like, are we gonna lose?
Yeah, I
that
mean, that's
curiosity.
that's interesting to speculate about, but it's hard to imagine that that would be the case. Like maybe for our solar system, right? But as we've been mentioning, the universe is just so big.
Yeah, there's
Right,
a lot of
it-
pretty stuff out there.
I think it's hard to imagine a point in our trajectory as a civilization where we wouldn't have more to see, and where we would become jaded to the point where it's like, okay, we've seen everything we need to see, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm skeptical as to whether that day will ever come. But
I'm glad you have the optimistic view.
do you share that or no?
I don't know. I think I want to share that, but like, I could also see it going in the other way. I'm glad that like us now have that view, and I'm alive now for that view. But I don't truly believe that it's going to be forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree that there are like other places that we might want to go, but I could also see, but like at that point, I don't think we'd be humans anymore. 'Cause we're not on Earth. But that's a whole other can of worms. Are we defined as humans because we are from Earth, or is the concept of human transcendent beyond our planet?
Irene, because I don't have an answer to that.
Well, I don't think anyone has had to explore that question, right? So I don't
Yeah.
think the definition has been created yet. So basically, we can create whatever we want, right?
Yeah.
So I think that humans should be defined as our specific makeup, our traits, the way our consciousness works, our intelligence works. Not necessarily that it's restricted to Earth. And obviously the origin should be discussed, the history, of human. It's like, okay, human was created on Earth. That's where they originated.
Yeah.
But I mean, after that, if you leave Earth and you're still within this form and haven't evolved to that's the next question. How much evolution would be necessary for us to no longer be human?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's
Yeah.
like,
That's why I didn't have an answer to it. It's because we're basically at the point now where we can completely change our genetic makeup to the point like where it's unrecognizable, right? If we wanted to, we have that power available to us, right? So I wanted to define it as something akin to that, but already now I can see it's like not going to hold up, right? So it's like I can easily foresee a future where, where we update our wetware, our biology, to the point, whether it's CRISPR or something else, to the point where it's just completely unrecognizable. So, and then you brought up an interesting way of perhaps maybe consciousness could be a way to define it, but I think we need to know more about that, right? Because we got the hard problem in front of us.
I don't just mean, I mean like our specific variant of consciousness. But yeah, exactly.
Right,
we have to define what that is.
Well, what I'm saying is
Boundaries.
because clearly our consciousness, I think we would define in relation to our evolution as a species, right? So it's like as we evolve and change our genetic makeup, soon we will be able to do so with intention behind it, to design it the way we want to. Our consciousness has got to change with it.
Yeah, it will definitely affect
Right.
our consciousness.
The way it feels to be a human would also have to change with it, wouldn't you agree?
So, yeah. I was going to ask you guys if any of you guys knew, like, in history of, like, the species. Like, what came before us in terms of evolution that was named differently, and what was the difference?
Should know this because I took a class on it once, but the class was at 9 a.m. So I didn't really remember.
Who would be paying attention?
There's Australopithecus at some point. No, I think it will... I mean, I guess it's like different stages of evolution and whether they could, like, time-wise, and then whether they could procreate. I don't know. Never mind. I'm not a biological anthropologist, but
yeah, I mean, but
that's true. There is some backlog that we could look into that would say.
I feel like that difference would be something that we could use as a definition of when we're no longer this variant,
this type of human.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
It's interesting.
That's true.
Because I think we refer to human, we refer to like what Homo sapien is that
right?
Mm-hmm.
Homo sapien sapien.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Homo sapien sapien. Oops.
Yeah.
I'm a physicist. Okay.
Yeah, we're bad at living things.
But yeah, that's interesting. So then once we reach a certain divergent point from where we are today, we'll have to come up with a new name, huh?
Yes.
We got
I
to
guess.
start drafting them up now.
Or would we come up with a new name because we start having people born in an entirely new environment?
Yeah.
But I guess that's evolution in itself.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider. Many different
Yes.
many different pathways for humanity to consider. But okay, I'm becoming mindful of your time. How are you feeling, Sahana?
Feeling good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's change gears a bit. I'm trying to consider how much time we got. So I said I wouldn't talk about like your specific institution, right? But perhaps you can. It sounded like there was perhaps a story to tell in terms of your experience at your undergrad institution, right? So perhaps you can just give us some background as to like what your experience was like there. What did the culture feel like? Things of the nature.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on in our sort of society at large right now with how we address issues of sexual assault within spaces that have very well established power dynamics. And academia is definitely one of them. When you have issues of people in positions of power, such as professors, preying upon people who are not in positions of power, such as students or staff members. And there was an instance where it was a professor was found guilty of sexual assault, and it was a big deal within our department, partially because it created rifts, sides were taken. It's also kind of it was a shocking thing in the sense of, for a subsection of the people who were there, it was part of the culture. Everyone just knew that this person was creepy, but it wasn't brought to light that it was officially legally recognized as assault as well. And so it's this idea of what crimes actually get prosecuted, and sexual assault in universities is a huge ongoing conversation right now. And how universities handle these sexual assault cases reflect upon the university at large and has an impact on the students. And a lot of it has to do with how much the students trust their university or not. And I mean, for me personally, it was definitely like, all right, any residual trust that was there was completely gone. But what I saw as a student was very interesting. It was of all the students banding together and saying, this is not okay. We do not want to live and work in an environment where this kind of stuff is okay. You've been told before. And how do we talk about this and be open and support people who came forward afterwards with stories after the initial stories were kind of broken open? So what I saw was this thing that just kind of blew a huge hole into what was previously, I think, a pretty tight-knit and respectful community. And then within that, it kind of splintered off into two factions of faculty and administrative members who were protecting the perpetrator of these crimes, and then everyone else who were dealing with the fallout. And within that, the students, the group that was most vulnerable, banded together and supported victims, supported people who came forward with similar stories or who also got vibes and said, like, you know what, I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to say anything because this person was in power, and mobilized really, really fast. So within a couple of days, there were just lots of emails going on. Graduate students really stepped up and banded together and put out a joint statement saying, like, you know, as graduate students, we support the undergrad students, we support the people who came forward with their tales. And that was really interesting to see, because so grad students, and as we're grad students now, it's interesting to think about. So grad students do a lot of the work in academic settings, but they're not in power. So it's this weird thing of where they control a lot of the means of production for research and stuff like that. They're the movers and pushers in a lot of academic departments, but they don't have the same power that faculty members do. Yeah. So I saw the grad students band together pretty quickly and take a definitive stance, which really emboldened the undergrads and helped provide a united front. And it was nice to, like, as a younger student, we could look up and see, like, oh, okay, even though these people they're slightly older than us, they're standing with us, and they also see the injustice in this, and we're able to mobilize quickly. So it's this really cool, like, unification of thing that happens. And they have this, they're kind of in between, so they hear stuff from professors, and we're able to leak information. And it was just, I saw a lot of good in people come out of a really bad thing that happened. And I think that was also a lot of the astronomy culture in itself, in that when these instances happened, instead of just brushing it under the rug, this was an instance where it was like, all right, we're going to talk about this and put this in the context of larger issues outside of astronomy, where sexual assault is happening on university campuses across the country. And how do we deal with this? How do we deal with things when they're tenured professors, or when they're deans, or when they're high up, or with the whole Michigan, like, gymnastics team stuff, when they are very high-ranking official people who have been getting away with crimes for years and years and years? How do we respond to that? And I think it was just really interesting to see, because there's no one who's not a university administrator or faculty member that is okay with this. And it was really an instance of, oh, this is where the institution, it's not necessarily people, it's people within the institution and the institution itself that is perpetuating this issue and that is protecting this predator in the midst. And that was when I personally realized that the university and the people at a university are two separate entities, and that the people at the university are not always able to overthrow the institution that is a university. And I think that's definitely affected my thought process and wanting to go into academia and higher education and stuff like that. But I think it's something we're seeing in a lot of other aspects of American culture right now, and is a conversation that I'm hoping doesn't go away.
Right.
And it definitely affected a lot of people that I knew and made them question whether they want to stay in academia.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so to me that sounds kind of inspirational, the way you phrase it, is the fact that all these students rose up and kind of supported these other students in their times of need.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a really great thing. And the thing I'm wondering now is how common that really is, right? I wonder if like there's something unique about the culture that your institution had, something that's been built up there somehow, or like, so like what your sense of the situation is, or whether it's like that is like something that we are all capable of, that we would all do if we were in the same situation, like whether it would happen at this institution here or elsewhere.
I mean, I think it ties back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation about how there are a fair number of women in astronomy, because in this instance it was the women who took charge and fought back, and like we literally had like a email thread of all the female undergrads. There weren't that many, but like we're all there, and so it really was a kind of thing that was led by the women in the department, the women that were affected by it, supported by other women, and then other non-women joined in or stayed quiet and were kind of like steamrolled by the support that was built up there. But that's also because we were in astronomy, like the women that are there are for the most part very vocal and very present and make space for other women. Like for instance, I know within massive star research in astronomy at large, like observational studies of massive stars, it is one of the few subsections of astronomy that is female dominated. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of like once women started getting faculty positions in that area, they just kind of kept going forward. And like female grad students are like, if you see a woman faculty member, you know, you're more inclined to want to work with them. And so it kind of like it opens the doors and brings more people in. And that really did have an effect, I think, on the culture. And so when you compare that kind of thing to women in astronomy to say women in a different situation, such as like a university like sports team or something like that, and it's a little bit different, of where women are not the ones that are opening the doors and holding positions of power, but rather when they are the commodities that the university is making money off of through a sports program and stuff. So it has a lot, I think, to do with like gender and power dynamics, and like once these women spoke up, whether their people and their surroundings were behind them or not, was a huge thing. And like money is definitely always a big part of it, but it also has to do with who is in positions of power. And like the other thing also about astronomy is like, because it's collaborative, you have to work with people and outside institutions. So it wasn't just restricted to our own. It was an internal sort of house thing, and the students there had to deal with it. But there was a lot of support and input from many other universities because research is connected.
Right.
And so that's why it blew up into this kind of like national global thing.
Right. So what this is making me conscious of is something I hadn't been aware of or thought of in this light, is the importance of underrepresented minorities in these fields for a completely other context, in terms of like having the means of or feeling more comfortable in terms of speaking up against these types of instances of like oppression and stuff like that. Like so the hypothesis then, it sounds like the way you're framing it, is that perhaps because that there were so many women in astronomy and astrophysics, that kind of made the community feel as though that there was enough support behind them that they could feel secure enough to stand up for, what they believed in. And so I think that makes complete sense to me. And so that places like, I think, it's just another piece of evidence, I think, that suggests the importance of having role models in terms of underrepresented minorities, and in this case specifically women in the field.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say to what you just said, like, women are still not like a majority in astronomy in general. It was more that it's like still a drastic minority, but sort of loud enough to make us think about it, or loud enough to be strong in the conviction about it, and getting like a coordinated response and support across many different aspects of the university's structure.
Right.
And so it's the kind of thing of where it's like, all right, when different groups band together, they can fight one sort of level of power.
Right.
But it's still this larger issue of it's not diverse enough to prevent this kind of thing from happening.
Yeah.
And it, like, yeah, having people in positions of power who can wield that power responsibly.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to get caught up in the semantics of it, but I thought the numbers were almost 50-50 for astronomers in terms of male, female, but
I think they're getting there.
right.
Yeah,
So
I've not seen a like recent one.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's like exactly 50-50 or how exactly close it was. But yeah, so I mean, it might not, clearly it could vary from department to department, but
I think maybe I was talking about like within that sphere it was not 50-50, but I agree with the field at large.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, which I think also has a huge part to do with the global response to instances in astronomy where this kind of thing pops up, is like, yeah, because the field has more women than a lot of other aspects of science, like, and the fact that we live in the digital age where we can talk about this stuff on Twitter and at conferences and stuff, like now you can get support from the outside, which I think is really important, but it's also important to have that support visible. We need to know that we can reach out to other faculty members or other institutions where there are different minorities, and somehow like connecting with people. If you don't know that they're out there, how are you supposed to connect with them?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe it's not fair to ask this, but what is your perspective, Irene? Because we're talking about because the hypothesis is that, having more women in the field perhaps gives you a little more security and a little more support in terms of standing up for your beliefs. Given that the distribution of male to female in terms of physics, and perhaps more specifically high energy physics, is much more weighted towards the male end. How is it that maybe this is a better question. What do you think is our responsibility as physicists to try to support these people? What do you think we can do to try to help women in case they're in these situations? I know it's a tough question. I'm putting you on the spot because I don't know what your experience is in terms of seeing anything like this, but
well, the first thing I would mention is, of course, definitely if you have more women who understand that experience of sexual assault, let's say in general, there's a lot of things that, it's not as common for men to be sexually assaulted as women. We know that. I mean, I'm not sure what the percentage of the statistics, but there's like a large disparity, right? So it's something that women have I would say a lot of women have experienced some sort of hairy situation, sexual assault, rape, or even if it's, I even think if you're walking down the street and
like harassment,
right? Sexual harassment. So it's something that you're very aware from, probably from a young age. I know I was aware of. Just seeing, first off, either on television or family, seeing those dynamics, those power dynamics that you see between men and women. me growing up, and I'm sure a lot of other women growing up, you're already aware of that as a young age. So you're going to be very empathetic towards that. So you've experienced it, you've seen it in a lot of different contexts. And so having the support of someone who really does understand that, you know, through an experience type of view, it's like so integral, because when you see that kind of power struggle and the negative effects that it's going to have on this woman, you are very inclined to help them and support them. It's just kind of like, it's like a sisterhood. You know, you see a woman suffering, you're like, I'm going to help her, right? So that number, even though it's not maybe 50-50, but having at least, even if it was 30-70, right? You have this group of women that it's like the more women you add in, the stronger it gets. I feel like the voice is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, right? So in a situation like at least in the department that we have now in high energy physics, there's 2 women. I mean, I'm not even officially in there yet, so there's 1, right? It's interestingly enough that actually the most women faculty members are actually in high energy. So that's something that's positive, but there's really no graduate women. And in that case, I can easily see that most likely if something happened to me, I probably would not be inclined to discuss it, because I would feel like the men wouldn't have that level of empathy that I would need to feel supported. Like they wouldn't really maybe even understand, or they would say, oh, you know, she's just exaggerating the situation. It's not that big of a deal, you know?
So just to clarify, I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
But to jump in, the men, in terms of the people, like the advisors, the other faculty members, or as well as the
graduate students,
the
faculty members, yes.
Okay.
In general. I mean, just because like it's such a stronger level of empathy that you can have if you have grown up seeing the situation and you identify with that group of people, like the women, right?
It's like an implicit, like you believe the
exactly,
situation.
and implicitly you believe it. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard. If someone who's never experienced it, there's going to be that doubt of like, all right, are you conveying what happened accurately? But
yeah,
that's the first step, convincing
yeah,
people,
exactly.
or like the fact that you have to get them to believe
so
you.
that's a perfect point. Like you bypass that step if you have like women there to support you. They will believe you, right?
Yeah.
But then the first step is, if it's mostly men, you feel like you have to convince them that it is something that has been occurring, the sexual assault or whatever, that has been causing you to feel really uncomfortable, right?
Right.
And you maybe feel like you're dismissed. So I think that I don't know anything about statistics in terms of high energy theory, in terms of like sexual assault or anything of this stuff.
You
But, I don't even remember the question anymore.
Well, let me interject with a new question.
Yeah.
How is it that you think we can increase the men's capacity for empathy towards this type of situation?
I mean, I think it's already happening. Like, I think already men are starting to have more empathy for the situation. I think that's I don't know if you saw that, you know, did you feel like there were some men that were like immediately on board in your department?
Yeah.
That were like, okay, we need to fight for this. This is not right. So I think like culturally, socially, we're progressing in that way. And I think that we're starting to teach men, boys, to really check their behavior and check the behavior of others and see whether, and try to be empathetic and put themselves in the woman's shoes. If they were them, would they feel uncomfortable with that behavior, you know? I think it's about awareness, teaching awareness, and teaching empathy. So I think that at a young age, you should be teaching people the things that can happen and trying to tell them, teaching them to put themselves in the place of other people, in the place of women's experience, teaching what is woman's experience. I think that's something that, you know, because of the history of women, we haven't always had power, right? And it's like something that it wasn't even on your radar, like, oh, they have an experience. At some point, it wasn't even like a...
Well, yeah, it's like teaching them that just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that is an important step. I think that through social media and the internet and all these connections that we can now have, I think that's helped for sure. And I think that we can take it a step further and introduce that kind of learning in schools as well. Which I'm always talking about education and ways that you can improve education. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a good answer. Right. So you did good. Despite how nervous you were. But okay. So how about some more bullet round questions?
All right,
So,
let's go.
Right. So I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a quick answer.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious if, like, say you had a friend who is just starting to explore physics, and they come to you and they say, I'm interested in physics. I think I might want to study this and pursue this. What advice would you give them? What would you like warn them about, or what do you think is important to educate them on
Yeah.
prematurely?
I would say from the beginning, don't associate the way physics is taught with what the subject actually is. I would also say pay attention to math. Math is very relevant as a physicist. It's more of like you need to have good tools to make good work, and so study math even if you don't necessarily care for the math. You need the skill set for it. And I would also say physics is really, really big. Don't get discouraged by how big it is. Instead, think of it as being fun, in that you can explore all of these different topics and see what catches your interest, see what your heart gets excited about, what you keep going back to and thinking about. That's going to be the section of physics that you want to pursue. I think the same skill set we all like is applicable to many different aspects of physics, but in order to really pursue it, you need that extra sort of curiosity, or that extra little something that keeps you going to walk down that area where it's dark and no one knows what's going on. But I would say if they're young, especially like maybe high school age or like in undergrad, I would say don't get discouraged by the way physics is taught, because it's a tough subject to teach, and it has a reputation for being really awful and tough. Like I've definitely experienced that. When I say, oh, I'm a physicist, people are either like, oh, like I really hated physics, or oh my god, you must be really smart. And then I'm like, neither of those responses are good for me right now.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I don't really know how to respond to that. So I think having one or two good physics teachers makes a huge difference in a lot of people's lives, but also just recognizing that physics is, there's something back there. It's more than just the way that it's taught to you.
Right. And so I guess I kind of want to press a little bit deeper as to something that I guess I'm just wanting more details on, in terms of your motivations for going into astronomy, right? So like because you said like it has to be the thing that you just want to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
You want to get more of.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's not clear for me yet is why you feel that astronomy was that thing for you.
That's a good question. I think, I don't really know why it is. I just know that it is. I mean, parts of it have to do with who I am as a person, just in like not ever sleeping at night. And I love this idea of like, there's more out there to explore. And the fact that the stars that we see are giant burning balls of gas that look tiny to us because they're very, very far away. Like the fact that space is big and there's a lot of empty space, that's something that I find very relaxing and very comforting to me. Part of it is that we make mistakes on a daily basis. There's a lot of stuff going on Earth that's very stressful and bad things happen. But within the course of my human life, I will never mess up bad enough that it will go beyond this planet. Everything's going to be just fine out there. Things are working on a cosmic scale. It's going to keep going. Yeah. So instead, I can take comfort in the fact that what's out there, it's fine. It's beyond my reach. I can appreciate it. I can look at it, but I cannot destroy it. Instead, I can focus on trying to like be kind and add good into my immediate environment. And that's all I have to worry about.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting point. It's something I hadn't internalized till just now in terms of like, I think space frightens a lot of people, right? And they'd rather like have this tight knit box of the world is the world, right? The world is
Yeah.
everything. Whereas I have a very similar experiences. Like I feel like the grandioseness of the universe, just how big it is really wonderful. I mean, I just like imagining like what could be out there and like what shapes and forms the universe comes in, and just it's all a mystery, right? Just uncovering the mystery is the joy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think to be an astrophysicist, I guess, or an astronomer, you have to be comfortable in the mystery, right?
Yeah, yeah. And like the way I think about it is like staring into the void is not a depressing experience for me. It's a relaxing, liberating experience, because any like the way that I personally think about it is like, all right, I have this finite form, and if I get filled with some kind of stress or worry or anger or any thought at all, if you are putting it out there, it dilutes enough such that it either doesn't matter, or anything that does matter will be there in a high enough concentration. And also, we look out into the darkness, but darkness is not absent of anything. The darkness is filled with stuff. That's the fun part about astronomy too. It's looking at the darkness, but darkness does not mean it's empty. There's
Right.
so much stuff going on there. And it's cool to be able to see beyond our human perception, beyond our eyes, using instruments like telescopes. And to see that there's really so much more out there than we can immediately see. Like getting access to this invisible world is also very, very exciting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just this pristine environment that is beyond our reach, but within our view.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the cosmic perspective is so liberating, right? It really puts like a frame on all of your thoughts and all the petty concerns of day-to-day trivialities that just seem so mundane, and people get so caught up on all this stupid bullshit, you know, and just stepping back and thinking about, you know, in the context of the universe, none of this shit matters, right? Let's just, you know, all we should really do is just try to have, you know, kind and loving experiences with one another, right? Like why worsen someone's conscious experience on this planet? Like what is the point? Like, so it's just, in that sense, I think astronomy has really, you know, provided a lot for humanity.
Yeah, and it also like it makes me feel like powerful in some ways, because like when I think about it, it's like, all right, take our sun, like great star, good sun, but it's like, for all we know, it's not like a conscious being. So for me, as like a being that's like insignificant compared to the size and power of the sun, the fact that I know about it, I know it's there, I know it's made of, it's like doing all this kind of cool like nuclear stuff, it's giving us power. If I go near it, it will kill me, but I know about it and it doesn't know about me. And that's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's a pretty fun perspective. But one other tangent, and I don't want to trigger you or send you down a rabbit hole or whatever, is this totally reminds me of what do you feel about flat earth arguments?
I feel like they're people reveling in the fact that they have the right to like not listen to information or discount information. I think at this point it's like, all right, sure, yeah, like you can think the earth is flat or whatever, but what is that going to do for your life? What does that add to the world in any way? And if you are not going to accept certain pieces of evidence, if you cannot include evidence in your critical thought, that is not critical thought. And that is walking into a conversation sort of determined to like not be open to another point. It's not a debate at that point.
Right.
It's just like holding your ground. And I also think it's more of like it indicates something about the way that we've gone in terms of our culture and modern society, because you can live a full and happy life as a flat earther.
Right.
It's not philosophically or emotionally going to like mess you up in any way. It's But it's this issue of where it's like, all right, we've reached a point where knowledge might not have the same power that it did before. And as people who part of our profession is the pursuit of knowledge, that's kind of scary.
Right.
Because we are going after this thing and investing in this thing that up till now had been taken for its face value. But now we're at a point of where you don't need knowledge to live a good life.
Mm-hmm.
And like, at this point, like, I'm like, if I meet a flat earther, I'm not going to debate them. I don't see the point.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a little bit scary in that I feel like knowledge has been devalued in a certain way
Right.
now. And I don't like the fact that the flat earth movement is constantly being fed. Like,
Yeah.
I get that it can be funny and farcical sometimes, but
Yeah.
we're starting to lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so I think this is an interesting point that I think ties into one of our first conversations, maybe the second one on this podcast, where I think as a society, we need to shift our values from valuing knowledge to valuing critical thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of finding a way of evaluating these things for yourself, right? And so this was Irene's recommendation for like K through 12 program, for instance, or whatever.
Education.
Do you want to speak more as to like, how is it at, say the president of 2020, hopefully it's not Trump, comes to you, is like, how do we stop these kids from believing in the flat earth? What is your proposal?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't just say flat earth. There's a lot of things that are these like conspiracy theories that there's definitely evidence against that, right? And there's evidence that shows specifically, okay, you know, this makes more sense if you actually think about it and assess all the information that's available. And, but I think a big issue is that people have not learned to kind of get past, how would I say this? Like an emotional barrier. I think that, you know, humans may have originally, so I don't know how to explain this very well, but so you have this need and feeling to belong, right? And it's something that drives us as part of survival, right? So I think that you can get stuck at that level where maybe you have some specific traits that are not of the norm. And so then you feel like at large in society, you don't belong in any group. And then you find a small subset of people who are also feel like they've been ostracized from society for some reason, and you connect at some level, and you share some idea or philosophy that goes against the norm, right? So in this case, the norm is this knowledge basis that we have, let's say the round earth. And then there's these people who maybe have felt ostracized for some reason. They meet each other, they have this idea of flat earth, they come together, and now it's this like social community for them. It's like a community that their whole worth is placed on, right? So in that way they don't want to hear evidence against that, because they don't want to break that community. If you hear the evidence and you're critical about that evidence and you realize that this one premise that's holding your social group together is incorrect, then you're afraid that it's going to dissolve the group and you will no longer belong.
It's evolved past that one piece of information.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're going to negate everything that is saying anything against what's holding you together in your group. I think that that's because they haven't been taught, you know, this idea of critical thinking at a young age, and how to build your self-esteem, having awareness of your emotions, what they mean, and how they're just a product of your machine, you know. It's like people glorify this and think it's something in a way magical. They put it on a pedestal. They can't see outside of the mechanisms of your own body, right? So you think it's, I don't know how you would say, like, you think it's something above you. I don't know how to explain that, but so what I mean to say is that I think that we should be teaching people that these emotions are just like a product of your neurotransmitters, right? So you feel a fear, you're going to feel, you're threatened in some way, you're going to feel this fear, but just accept that for what's happening, realize that it's part of your body who's conducting this. And then you can hopefully, once you realize that, feel the emotion, let it pass, move on. So mindfulness is important, right? No, that should be taught, I think, in K through 12. So this kind of awareness of your body and what's going on and your emotions and how to deal with emotions and how to express your emotions, how to communicate, I think will build the empathy that's necessary so that people don't feel ostracized from society. So they feel like they can belong, they feel accepted for who they are. And then on top of that, they need to be taught critical thinking skills. So instead of teaching kids, okay, this is how you solve a math problem, this is how you do science, these are the things you need to do, follow step A, B, C, you give them tools. And then you say, okay, I'm posing you a question. Can we explore this? Right? So you ask them any question, like, okay, like, what do you think is the mechanism of how a plant grows? And then children can go exploring with tools that they're given by the teacher. They ask questions, the teacher gives them more tools, and they come up with their own conclusions step by step. So I think that that's something that's lacking in general. I think some schools are trying to make an effort with project-based learning, with trying to develop these critical thinking skills, and I think that's still something that's very much needed at the younger age. So I think that necessary is teaching mindfulness, teaching awareness of emotions, teaching how to communicate these, getting rid of all these expectations of what a man is supposed to be like, or what a woman is supposed to be like, that the binary, like there's one gender, the other gender, like, so people can feel free to express how they feel and who they are. And I think that, I know I think we're trying to get there, and hopefully, there's people doing great work in education and trying to get to that end point. But I think that more people need to be vocal, and in the scientific community, in physics, I think people definitely need to step it up in terms of realizing the necessity for diversity in thought and like everything, right? In culture, socially. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, we could go in a lot of directions.
Yeah, but what you said just makes me think of like cancel culture and how a lot of, or like one aspect of critical thought is changing your thought based on new information. And part of that is implicitly like saying like, okay, I was wrong. Now that I have this new information, I'm going to change my opinion or change my stance. And I think that is something that like I see at least online, of where like maybe a celebrity or a politician or somebody, they're in the public eye now, but they might have said something controversial like 10 years ago. And we say like, oh, okay, this person is just flat out bad because they said this thing 10 years ago. Or if they say something bad now and then somebody else calls them out on it and then they try to correct it, oftentimes they're not given that space to engage in the critical thought or like admit that they're wrong and move on. Yeah. And I think that's also part of critical thought, like you said, of where they're afraid or they're ostracized, is because you do have to admit that you're wrong. Yeah. And that is something that we do as physicists all the time, is we are wrong all the time. But that's why a lot of our job has to do with critical thinking, and we have to think through problems and think about, okay, what did we do wrong? Why was it wrong? And how do we use those mistakes to find our way towards what's right? And so yeah, a lot of critical thought is the hard stuff that we're not used to. And as growing up, like you hope adults have all the answers to all the problems. You want to be able to be right about everything, but we can't.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a good point. I mean, also helping people be comfortable with being wrong and being okay with that, and other people being empathetic towards that. Yeah. I mean, like, oh, it's okay, you're wrong. I mean, I'm just giving you some information. What do you think about it? And having a conversation about it where people can bring their knowledge, information that they have, and not make others feel bad about being wrong, right?
Exactly, and that brings back into whether we accept evidence as evidence or if we brush it off because it was not a part of what we thought of as correct before. And that's kind of, I think, part of the flat earth thing is like, all right, even if there is evidence, like I'm digging my heels into this one thought and I'm not going to change it.
Because it's so emotional to them. It's like you've connected your identity to this position. Yeah. Right? And I think you've talked about that before, so.
Yeah, no, I've talked about it a lot, right? It's just something I become mindful of when I'm teaching or when I'm tutoring, is that I've become very aware of the fact that people are very attached to their ideas to an emotional level, right? Some people might think that when it comes to like a way of solving like a math problem, you can't be emotional about it, but that's not true, right? You'll find that like when you're teaching a student or something about a way of solving a problem or a way in which their logic might have been faulty, you'll get an emotional response, right? You'll get a fight or flight response or freeze, right? They will try to defend that idea because for some reason or another, they attach their own self-worth to it, right? And so once I saw this in others, I became mindful of it myself, and it's become a thing of practicing for me, of like, I have to be mindful of whenever someone like presents me with contradictory evidence that I should detach that emotional reaction to it, right? Because we're just talking about logic here. We're just talking about reasoning. There's no reason why I should get defensive about these ideas. They're just ideas, right? And I think it's important to just accept whichever ideas seem most valid and, compelling to you, but having the tool set as to being able to question, what ideas are compelling to you is important.
Yeah. I think you bring up a great point in that, like, we treat these subjects like math and physics or even like chemistry, all these things we called quote unquote hard sciences, as if they're devoid of emotion, as if they're these purely logic and intellect based subjects. And maybe at their core they are, but we're humans studying them and do them. And so we have an emotional attachment. And like we've all talked a lot about our personal passions and wanting to pursue physics, but it does go the other way. Like physics does affect my emotions.
Yeah,
and,
definitely, 100%.
Yeah, like sometimes it makes us happy and sometimes it breaks our hearts. And I think that's a part of it, at least for me, like as a kid, like learning about this kind of stuff, you're never taught to associate your emotions with it, even though you experience them. Yeah. And that's why a lot of kids, even though they might not inherently be like bad at math, they hate math because it makes them feel bad about themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah. And for those who aren't convinced that, you can have an emotional attachment to equation or something like that, go to a science conference.
Oh yeah. Right. See how many tattoos there are in equations.
Right. And see how upset people will get when you try to question, their findings or whatever. So there's certainly emotion behind it, and we got to unpack that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm becoming mindful of your time again. So, any final questions you have for us, or you just want to give a shout out to someone out there in the void? Or
well, I already shout out to aliens. I mean, I want to say like,
at least come in our dreams tonight, please.
Yes. I mean, I will say like, I'm glad that you're doing this podcast because, they're like I said, like we are studying a topic that is thought to be very impersonal and logical, but there is a lot of emotion and love that goes into physics. And a huge part of like being graduate students and working in this kind of environment, I know this extends to other sciences like chemistry and engineering and stuff. As grad students, we put in a lot of work, but a lot of times I feel like I'm struggling to hang on to the human parts of myself. I'm struggling to hang on to the self-care and make sure that I have to carve out times to be responsible and continue to live my life kind of deal. And I think that's a whole aspect of our field that's not talked about a lot. We only highlight the professional, intellectual achievements, but a lot of physicists are really great people and add a lot of love and light into the world. And a lot of the love that we put out there has to do with the love that we have for our subject and what we learn from our trials and tribulations in physics. So I think these kinds of conversations are important. I'm glad that we can talk about this kind of stuff because I think as physicists we have a certain type of analytical thinking that once we turn it to non-physics options, it gives us a framework where we can talk about these larger issues together, and we can talk about them in a space because we're used to debating math problems together. So
of course
we can debate other stuff. So I think this is like a really good idea, and I'm glad that like we have groups of physicists here who are willing to engage in these topics. And like, I hope if there's like anyone out there listening to this, if any of this resonates with you, like think about it, talk with your friends, and like maybe try to apply whatever thinking you have in your professional life to your personal life and see if it translates, because I think it translates for us.
Right. Very well said.
Yeah, thank you
And-
so much. That was great.
Right. And so I guess here's just where I say thank you for coming onto the podcast. It's been great having
thanks
you.
for having me. This was fun.
Right. Right. So there's no plugs for Sahana, but it's been a pleasure, and maybe we'll see each other and see you on the astrophysics astronomy headlines sometime.
Yeah, look for me in space.
All right. Thank you very much.